before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. You don't hear silence until you've been alone in a place where even the birds have stopped talking. I used to think I understood solitude. I thought it was a matter of distance, of being away from cities, from noise, from people. But real solitude, it's not just a lack of company. It's the slow and creeping realization that you're no longer on familiar ground, and whatever's out there with you doesn't care that you are. My name is Clay. I'm 41, divorced 3 years now. I took up solo RV camping as a kind of therapy. No kids, no one waiting at home, just me, the rig, and the road. I told myself I was reconnecting with nature. In truth, I was running from a house that echoed with too much absence. At first it worked. Waking up to mist curling over pine groves in Montana, listening to coyotes call each other under the Nevada stars, it reminded me that I was still alive, that the world was wide, and maybe I could find a new corner to make peace with myself. That's how I ended up at Black Hollow, a remote patch of land just outside Yellowstone, accessible only through a series of gravel roads with barely visible signage. It wasn't an official site, more like a clearing passed between boondockers who preferred quiet over comfort. I'd read about it on a forum. Someone called it sacred stillness. That sold me. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The trees arched like cathedral ceilings above my campsite. A stream whispered a few yards out, gliding over moss-covered stones. No other rigs, no distant hum of generators, just still air and old wood. The only sign of previous campers was a half-buried fire ring and a faded beer can someone had wedged under a log. I buried it, tidied the site, and told myself I'd stay 3 nights. That night, the stillness changed. Not all at once, just a subtle shift. The frogs that croaked through dusk grew quiet a little too early. The breeze, which had carried the scent of pine and water all afternoon, stopped dead. My ears rang with the kind of silence that makes you question your own breathing. I lay in my rig, half dozing when I heard the knock. Not loud, not frantic, 3 slow, deliberate taps. At first, I thought it had to be a branch, maybe a pine cone. I sat up, held my breath. Nothing. Just the sound of blood rushing through my ears. Then again, 3 knocks, same rhythm, same weight. I didn't open the door. Not that night. I stayed in my bunk, clutching my flashlight like a child, told myself it was nothing, that I'd imagined it. But when I stepped outside at dawn, I found 3 small stones stacked on the step of my RV. Perfectly balanced, dry, though the grass around them was wet with morning dew. I should have left. Every bone in me knew it. But something about the way the air pressed in around the trees, the way it muffled sound, made it feel like if I ran, I'd wake something up. So I stayed. Told myself it was probably another camper playing games, that maybe someone had set up down the hill and I just hadn't noticed. By the second night, I'd lost the illusion. It started with whispers, not voices, more like the sound of fabric brushing past bark, movement just beyond my sight. I'd catch flashes of gray or pale brown between the trees, gone the moment I turned my head. I circled my rig twice before locking up tight. Sat inside with the blinds drawn, waiting for the sun like a prisoner marking time. That was the night I heard breathing just outside the window. Not an animal's huff or snort, not the shallow flutter of wind against the wall. Human breathing, controlled, measured. Like someone was crouched just beneath the glass, counting each inhale. I nearly screamed, but my throat closed up. It was like the fear paralyzed my lungs. I stood frozen in the center of the rig, watching the curtain bulge slightly, as if something was leaning into it. Then, gone, just like that. No footfalls, no retreating crunch through leaves, silence again. I didn't sleep. Every minute felt like an hour. The woods outside weren't woods anymore. They were something watching me, surrounding me, listening in ways I didn't understand. By the 3rd day, I was unraveling. It rained that afternoon, a slow, cold drizzle that coated everything in gray. I packed up, but not fast enough. My hands kept shaking, and every time I opened a door or bent to unplug something, I expected to feel breath on my neck. When I walked around to check my tires before leaving, I saw something scrawled into the mud near my back wheels. 5 letters. Clear as day. My name. Clay. No footprints. No signs of dragging. Just those letters pressed clean into the earth like they'd been branded there. I didn't care about protocol or courtesy anymore. I left the fire ring as it was, didn't bury the ashes or sweep the gravel. I threw the rig into gear and tore down that gravel road faster than I should have. My side mirrors reflected nothing but wet trees closing behind me. I didn't stop until I was 3 towns away, parked in the back of a gas station lot under a buzzing security light. I stayed there for 2 days, and I never went back. People ask why I still camp alone after that. Why I keep dragging myself out to remote places when I've stared into the teeth of something I couldn't explain. The truth is, I don't have a good answer. Maybe it's because I know now that fear is real and it's not always something you can outrun. Maybe it's because part of me is still trying to understand what I saw or didn't see in those woods. But mostly, I think it's because that kind of fear sharpens you. It scrapes away the distractions and forces you to listen. Not just to the forest, but to yourself. I don't romanticize the wild anymore. I don't pretend it's all sunsets and campfire songs. There are places out there that aren't meant to be tamed. Places that remember, and sometimes if you camp alone long enough, they remember you. I didn't talk about what happened at Black Hollow for over a year. Not because I thought no one would believe me, though that was part of it, but because I couldn't explain it without sounding like someone who'd lost their grip. You start telling people about breathing at your window, about your name appearing in the mud, and you become a story they tell at dinner tables. You become the punchline, the cautionary tale of too much solitude. So I buried it, drove to safer spots, campgrounds with picnic tables and other people, stayed near towns, places with cell service and lights that hummed overhead all night. And for a while, that worked. But something about that silence had settled in me. Not the fear, that was sharp and short-lived. It passed like a knife through skin. What lingered was the quiet, that oppressive, intelligent quiet. It followed me like a shadow. Even when I was parked 50 feet from the next RV, I'd catch myself turning off the fan, leaning toward the window, straining to hear what wasn't there. Then I met June. She was parked 3 rigs down in a campground outside Glacier. A school bus conversion, bright yellow, cluttered with stickers and solar panels. She was in her 50s, ex-nurse, and she'd been solo for almost a decade. We bonded over campfire coffee and bad weather. She had this calm to her, like she'd already stared down the worst things in life and made peace with them. One night, after the fire burned low and the night took over, I asked her the question I hadn't dared ask anyone else. You ever hear something out there? Something that wasn't animal or human? She didn't flinch, didn't laugh or brush it off. She just stared into the coals and said, I camped in New Mexico once. There were no birds the whole time, just this pressure in the air, like being underwater. I left the second night. That was it. No drama, no elaboration. But the way she said it, I knew she'd felt it too. That presence, that wrongness in a place that should have felt safe. Turns out, a lot of solo campers have a story like that. Most won't tell it unless you earn their trust. But they all describe it the same way. A shift in the woods, a silence that feels like being watched, the sense that something is not right and has not been right for a very, very long time. It changed how I camped. Now I never stay in one place more than 2 nights. I keep small stones inside the door of my RV, so if I hear them drop or shift, I know something's moved them. I check my tires every morning for prints, human or otherwise. I don't light fires unless I need to. I don't draw attention anymore, and I listen. Always. Not for sounds, but for the lack of them, because that's the real danger. People think it's bears, or bad weather, or getting stuck without cell signal. But those are loud dangers. You can prepare for those. You can see them coming. The real threats, the ones no ranger can warn you about, they arrive on padded feet. They disguise themselves in the breeze. They wait for you to let your guard down. Sometimes they come wearing the sound of your own name. 2 months ago, I parked for the night just outside Lassen, not far from Manzanita Lake. Official grounds were full, but I found a quiet pullout near a trailhead, looked barely used. Perfect. At dusk, I watched the fog roll in through the trees. It settled low and thick, hugging the trunks. I almost didn't notice the figure standing at the edge of the mist. It wasn't moving, just standing there, too far to see clearly. Could have been a hiker, could have been a trick of the fog, but I couldn't convince myself of that, because I'd seen stillness like that before. I sat inside with the blinds open, watching it, waiting. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. The fog deepened, and when I looked again, it was gone. No movement, no sign it had ever been there. I drove out that night, didn't wait for a second chance. I used to think camping was about escaping the noise, but sometimes the noise is what saves you. It's the silence that wants to take something from you. It lures you in with beauty, with solitude, with stars scattered over black trees like diamonds. It waits until you forget how small you are, how vulnerable you are. That's what they never put in the brochures. National parks are beautiful, but beauty doesn't mean safe. Not every trail leads back. Not every shadow is empty. You learn to respect that. You learn that solo camping isn't about being fearless. It's about listening to your instincts, to the forest, to the feeling in your gut when the birds stop singing and the trees hold their breath, and sometimes to the knock on your door that no one should be there to make. I returned to Black Hollow once. I don't really know why. Maybe to prove something to myself. Maybe because nightmares lose their grip when you confront them in daylight. Or maybe because some places don't let you go until they've said what they came to say. It was last fall, mid-October. The trees had gone bone bare, their leaves rusted and mulching into the forest floor. The road in was overgrown, almost like the land had been trying to reclaim it, like even nature wanted it forgotten. I nearly turned back twice, but I kept going, telling myself, it's just a place. Just dirt, trees, and shadows. Nothing more. When I reached the clearing, I stopped cold. It was smaller than I remembered. The stream had dried to a whisper. The fire ring I'd made was gone. No trace of my last visit, no sign I'd ever been there. But the silence, that living, vibrating silence, was exactly the same. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe longer, just breathing, just listening. The way you do when you're not sure if you're alone. That's when I saw it. Half buried beneath the leaves was a stone. Smooth, round, bone white. Too clean for this forest. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to, because right beside it, scratched faintly into the soil, were 5 letters. Not my name this time. Just one word. Stay. I turned and left. Slowly, carefully. The way you back away from a sleeping bear. Quiet and respectful, hoping it doesn't notice. Or worse, hoping it already has and just hasn't decided what to do about you yet. And the truth is, I don't know if it followed me. Sometimes I think it did. Some nights, I hear things, not loud things, not footsteps or screams or bangs, not those kinds of stories. Just wrong things, like the wind moving around the rig when everything outside is still, or the soft scrape of branches brushing against the roof, even though I parked under open sky, or the way shadows shift in the reflection of my microwave door. Sometimes I wake up at 3:17 a.m., always that time, heart pounding, eyes wide open, and I just know there's something waiting on the other side of the wall. But I keep going, because this is the life I chose. Not just the road, not just the freedom, but the knowing, the understanding that something else is out there. Something we don't talk about, something we can't name, not without drawing its attention. It lives in the forgotten corners of these parks, in the places where the trails disappear, where the birds fall silent, where the air feels heavier than it should, where your instincts scream at you to leave and your ego whispers to stay. Maybe it's always been there. Maybe it's something the animals know. Maybe it's something the trees protect. And I think that's why the silence feels alive. Because it is. People like to believe that nature is passive, that it's just scenery, but it's not. Nature remembers, it listens. And sometimes, when the fog hangs too long, when the stars vanish behind clouds you never saw coming, it speaks back. You don't have to believe me. Most people won't. But if you've ever been deep in the woods and suddenly felt your stomach drop, if you've ever heard the forest go quiet and thought, this isn't right, if you've ever been alone but felt someone watching from behind the trees, then you already know. There are things out here that move when we don't, that watch when we forget to look, that wait until we're sure we're safe, just to remind us that we never really are. There are unseen dangers in solo RV camping. They won't always leave tracks, they won't always knock, they won't always need permission. But once they've noticed you, you're never truly alone again. The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old beat-up camper a short distance away. Nestled under the towering pines, it was empty. No sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps. A perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off. Too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death, mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him, a man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. Didn't mean to spook you, he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season. I wasn't expecting anyone either, I replied, forcing a smile. Just needed some time alone, you know? Yeah, I get that, he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years. I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. Be careful out here, Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down. My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. Let me guess, ghost stories? Miners and all that? Rick's expression didn't change. Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp. He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for, solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures. Shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek, their outlines faint but unmistakably human. They moved like they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen, but Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night, the miners, been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. "Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights they're just echoes. Other nights..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes. My name is Adam Smith, and this happened to me on October 18th, 2015. I had always been a big fan of camping, getting away from the chaos of city life and immersing myself in the quiet solitude of nature. That weekend, my friend Owen and I decided to head out to the Black Hills in South Dakota. We packed up my RV with enough supplies for a few days, including plenty of beer, some fishing gear, and enough junk food to last us a week. Owen and I had been friends since college, bonding over our love for the outdoors and our mutual disdain for cubicle life. We both worked in finance, a job that paid well but sucked the soul right out of you. So these trips were our lifeline, a way to recharge and feel human again. This time, we were aiming for a spot we'd heard about from a guy at the bar, deep in the hills, off the beaten path, and supposedly untouched by tourists. We rolled into the site just before sunset. It was perfect, an open clearing surrounded by dense forests with a clear stream running nearby. We parked the RV, set up camp, and cracked open a couple of beers. The first night was uneventful, just the way we liked it. We sat by the fire, talked about nothing in particular, and enjoyed the stars. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We found a small trail that led deeper into the forest and followed it for a couple of miles until we came across an old abandoned cabin. It looked like it had been there for decades, maybe longer. The wood was rotting, the windows were broken, and the door hung off its hinges. Naturally, Owen and I were curious, so we decided to take a look inside. The cabin was empty except for a few pieces of broken furniture and a lot of dust. There were no signs that anyone had been there in years, so we didn't think much of it. We left and spent the rest of the day hiking, fishing, and generally enjoying the peace and quiet. That evening, back at the campsite, things started to get strange. It was just after dinner, and we were sitting by the fire again when we heard a noise coming from the woods. At first, we thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sounds didn't fit. It was more like a scratching, followed by a low, almost guttural sound that I can't quite describe. Owen grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the noise. We didn't see anything, but the scratching continued, getting louder and closer. We both stood up, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. We looked at each other, shrugged it off, and went back to our beers, chalking it up to the woods playing tricks on us. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing noises, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but every time I looked out the window, there was nothing there. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Owen and I decided to take it easy that day. We stayed close to the campsite, fishing in the stream and lounging around. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I didn't say anything to Owen, not wanting to sound paranoid, but I could tell he felt it too. He kept glancing into the woods, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a tense alertness. That evening, as we were cooking dinner, we heard the noise again. This time, it was louder and more insistent. Owen grabbed his flashlight and a hunting knife we kept for emergencies. We moved slowly toward the edge of the clearing, the fire casting long shadows behind us. "Who's there?" Owen called out, his voice steady but with an edge of tension. There was no response, just the continued scratching and rustling. We took a few more steps and then we saw it, or rather, we saw the outline of it. Something large, hunched over with limbs that looked too long for its body. It was just standing there, half hidden by the trees, watching us. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, more to myself than to Owen. "I don't know," he replied, gripping the knife tighter. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, neither of us daring to move. Then, in a flash, the thing was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. We backed up slowly, not taking our eyes off the spot where it had stood, and made our way back to the fire. "Maybe we should leave," I suggested, my voice shaky. Owen shook his head. "No, not yet. Let's see what happens. It could just be some animal." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. We finished dinner in silence, like the crackling of the fire the only sound. We decided to take turns keeping watch that night, just in case. Owen took the first shift, while I tried to get some sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to Owen shaking me, his face pale. "It's back," he whispered, "and it's closer." I grabbed the flashlight and knife and followed him outside. The noise was louder now, more aggressive. We shone the light toward the sound and saw the creature again, closer this time, its eyes reflecting the light in an eerie glow. It moved slowly toward us, almost as if it was testing us. "Get in the RV," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We backed up slowly, keeping the light on the creature. It followed us, never breaking eye contact. We scrambled into the RV, slamming the door shut and locking it. The creature came right up to the door, scratching at it with long, sharp claws. We could hear its breathing, heavy and ragged, as it tried to get inside. "Start the engine," Owen said, his voice tight with fear. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, not caring where we were going as long as it was away from that thing. The RV lurched forward and we sped down the narrow dirt road, the creature's silhouette disappearing in the rearview mirror. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. We pulled into a gas station and parked, both of us too shaken to speak. We sat there in silence for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. "Do you think it followed us?" Owen finally asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I replied, my voice hoarse, "but I don't want to find out." We decided to call it quits on the camping trip and headed back home. The drive was long and tense, both of us constantly checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that thing following us. But we made it back without incident, and after a few days, the fear started to fade, replaced by a nagging sense of curiosity. What was that thing? Where did it come from? We never found out. We did some research, looking up local legends and folklore, but nothing matched what we saw. The closest we came was a story about a creature called Rolus, an ancient mythical beast said to haunt the forests. But that was just a story, right? Owen and I haven't been camping since. We still talk about that trip sometimes, trying to make sense of it, but we always come up short. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. All I know is that something is out there, something that defies explanation, and it's better to leave it alone. So if you ever find yourself in the Black Hills, remember this story. Stay on the beaten path, don't go exploring old cabins, and if you hear strange noises in the night, get the hell out of there. You never know what might be watching you. My name's Kai Walker, and this all happened back in 2018 in the middle of a fishing trip near Banff, Canada. My friends always say I'm the reluctant outdoorsman, so you can imagine how convincing they had to be to get me to join. My idea of a weekend is more like catching up on movies than catching fish, but they swore it'd be a relaxing getaway. So I figured, what could go wrong? I joined my friends, Greg, Tim, and Jesse at this little cabin they'd rented just outside Banff. Right from the start, the place felt weird. It was miles from any civilization, hidden in a dense cluster of trees with just enough space between them for sunlight to make it through. But they insisted it was all part of the charm. Greg went on about how peaceful it would be to get away from it all. No phones, no internet, just us and nature. The first day was admittedly not bad. We grilled, threw back some beers, and shared a few laughs around a fire. Greg was the only one genuinely interested in fishing, so we mostly left him to it while Tim and Jesse tried, unsuccessfully, to teach me how to set up a proper tent. It was a pretty good setup, but that was before the night noises started. That first night, just as the fire began to die down and the guys started drifting off to their tents, I heard something. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. A strange, low noise that didn't fit with the usual sounds of crickets or rustling leaves. I nudged Tim, who muttered something about my city boy imagination, and went back to sleep. I told myself he was right. I probably just wasn't used to all these forest sounds. But the next day, Greg found something weird down by the lake where he'd been fishing alone. He showed us a patch of trampled grass and broken branches leading from the water up to the edge of the woods. I'm telling you, it was like something big came up from the lake, he insisted. Tim rolled his eyes. What, like a bear? Greg shook his head. Nah, bigger. And there aren't any fresh bear tracks around here. Despite Greg's concern, we brushed it off as him trying to spook us. The day went by as planned. More fishing, more jokes, more beers. I almost forgot about the noise from the night before. Almost. Later that night, though, as we sat around the fire, the same sound came again. This time, it was louder and closer. It was like a cross between a howl and a snarl, low and drawn out, enough to set my teeth on edge. Jesse stopped mid-sentence, and we all looked at each other, our faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. Nobody said a word. Then the sound came again, this time from the direction of the lake, and it was getting closer. Tim laughed nervously. Maybe it's Greg's lake monster come back to check on us. He was trying to play it cool, but I could tell he was on edge. We decided to head inside the cabin and lock the doors, just in case. The walls were thin, and it wasn't the most secure structure, but it felt safer than being out in the open. We set up camp in the cramped living room, each of us sleeping on whatever piece of furniture we could find. I was just drifting off when I heard it again. But this time, it was so close that I felt it vibrate through the floorboards. There was something prowling outside, something heavy that dragged its feet, moving back and forth in front of the cabin. We were all dead quiet. Even Tim had lost his usual bravado. Then came a thud against the door, like something or someone was pressing on it, testing it. Tim held a knife. Jesse had a flashlight. Greg had a fishing rod. I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of it, but when I saw the door visibly bow under the pressure, I stopped breathing. Whatever was outside, it wasn't human, and it was way too strong. Greg whispered, "Do you think it's like some animal we don't know about?" I didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Another thud hit the door, harder this time. We could hear wood splintering. That's when Jesse, holding the flashlight, peered through the gap in the curtains. "Oh God," he whispered, barely audible. His face went pale, and he took a shaky step back. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the door, his mouth moving like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, he muttered, It looked like a wolf, but not right. Too tall. And it was standing." Greg groaned. "This isn't happening." But it was. We all heard it. Whatever was outside let out a kind of grunt, something almost human but animalistic, like a predator toying with its prey. I felt like I was going to pass out from the tension. Then suddenly, it went silent. Just when we thought it might have left, the noise came again, but this time from the back of the cabin. It was circling us, studying us, waiting. We barely slept. I spent the night clutching a fire poker as if that would do any good. When dawn broke, the thing was gone, but the unease lingered. We ventured out to inspect the damage, and sure enough, the door was splintered. Deep claw marks gouged the wood. The ground outside was covered in strange tracks, larger than anything I'd ever seen. They looked like oversized wolf prints, but elongated, as if whatever made them had been walking on two legs. We should have left right then. But Greg, ever the stubborn one, insisted we stay. "It's just an animal," he argued. "Probably a weird-looking bear or something. We'll be fine during the day." And for most of the day, we were. We didn't venture too far from the cabin, and we stayed within sight of each other. But as the sun began to set, the tension in the air returned. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. That night, it came back. This time, it didn't stop at the door. Whatever it was began circling the cabin, scraping at the windows, dragging its claws along the walls. We could hear it sniffing, as if trying to find a way inside. I was terrified out of my mind, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. Just when we thought it was going to break through, it stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the noise. We held our breath, listening, waiting for any sign that it had left. Then we heard a new sound, a scratching, coming from under the floorboards. Jesse cursed and we scrambled back, watching the floor as something pushed against it from underneath. It was clawing its way up, trying to break through. I could see the boards start to buckle and crack, and I knew we were seconds away from coming face to face with whatever nightmare was beneath us. In a panic, Greg shouted, "The truck! We can make a run for it." We didn't need convincing. We bolted out the door, barely pausing to grab our things, and sprinted to the truck. I could hear it behind us, breaking through the cabin floor. Its snarl, no, not a snarl. Something worse. Greg fumbled with the keys, cursing while Tim and Jesse yelled for him to hurry. I looked back, and I saw it. Just for a second. A hulking figure covered in matted fur, towering over the cabin. Its limbs were too long. It moved in a jerky, unnatural way, like it was learning how to use its own body. Greg finally got the truck started, and we tore out of there. The thing chased us down the dirt road. I don't know how far it followed us, but we didn't stop until we were miles away. And to this day, I swear, sometimes when I'm alone, I can still hear that scratching. When we finally reached a town, we stumbled out, dazed and exhausted, trying to explain what had happened, but no one believed us. The police found the cabin in shambles, claw marks everywhere, but they chalked it up to a bear. No one could explain the tracks, though. They were too big, too wrong. I heard rumors later, stories about strange creatures in the Canadian wilderness, sightings of things that shouldn't exist. Whatever it was, it didn't seem to fit into any category I'd ever heard of. It was something old, something that belonged in the shadows of ancient forests, not in the world I knew. As for us, we don't talk about it much. We keep in touch, sure, but that night sits between us like a weight we can't shake off. And sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can still hear those scratching noises echoing from somewhere deep in the night. I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died, the night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies, 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone. "Come on, Red, we need your experience out here. What could go wrong?" I didn't laugh, not this time. So there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding road snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. "Red, you still with us?" Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. "Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow." Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it up ahead. Just barely visible through the fog was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it. But there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. "Pete, you see that truck up ahead?" Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. "There's no truck, Red, just us." I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front, it wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area. But as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old, real old, the kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore. And then it hit me, hard and fast. The paint job. The faded red stripe down the side, the same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. "No," I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be Marty's truck. It was gone, destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. "Red, you good back there?" Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice shaky, "just seeing things." But I wasn't seeing things. Not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening. The curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again. But this time, it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. "Red, you gotta help me." The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me. I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead, gone. But that voice, it was his. Down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference. But the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear. But there was nothing, just the thick swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop. Let the fog clear." "Negative, Red. We've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road, the old rusted cab, the faded red stripe. It was Marty's rig, no doubt about it. But when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fishtailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. I saw Marty's truck. Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. Marty didn't make it. It wasn't Pete. It wasn't Jerry. It was Marty. His voice filled the cab, clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty. You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrail through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real." "It's the mountains messing with you," I snapped back. "Messing with me. Don't act like you don't hear him, Pete. Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it. The same curve where Marty had gone over. The same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? "Marty, I'm sorry," I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. "I'm so damn sorry." The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck, in the middle of the road, blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second. My rig skidded, the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "Red?" Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. "You still with us?" "Yeah," I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. "I'm still here." The mountains stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind, and I knew, in some way, he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. I was just about ready to call it a day when I realized I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. My name is Jonathan Vickers, and I pride myself on having a pretty good sense of direction, but on this occasion, I found myself completely disoriented. I was in the backwoods of West Virginia, a place where GPS signals die, and cell phone service is a myth. What was supposed to be a scenic drive through the Appalachian Mountains had turned into an unexpected detour into an isolated dense forest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dirt road. The deeper I drove, the narrower and rougher the path became, until it was barely wide enough for my car. I decided it was time to turn around and head back to the main road, but as I began to maneuver a three-point turn, the car suddenly lurched and stalled. The engine refused to restart. I cursed under my breath and got out to see what was wrong. The right front tire was flat. A jagged rock had punctured it. "Great, just great," I muttered, kicking the tire in frustration. With no spare tire and no cell service, I had no choice but to set out on foot in search of help. I grabbed a flashlight and my jacket from the car, hoping I'd come across a house or cabin where I could call for assistance. The forest was eerily silent, except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. The towering trees closed in around me, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dark canopy. After what felt like hours of walking, I saw a dim light flickering through the trees. I quickened my pace, my hope rekindled. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing an old, dilapidated cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the faint smell of cooking meat wafted through the air. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it creaked open to reveal a wiry man with a scruffy beard and sunken eyes. "Evenin'," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "What brings you out here?" I explained my predicament, and he nodded slowly, sizing me up with a wary eye. "You're welcome to come in and use the phone," he said, stepping aside. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit by a kerosene lamp. The furniture was sparse and crude, a mismatched collection of old chairs and a rickety table. The man introduced himself as Earl. He led me to a phone mounted on the wall, but when I picked up the receiver, there was no dial tone. "Line's been down for a while," Earl said, "but you can stay here for the night. Ain't safe to be wandering these woods after dark." With little choice, I accepted his offer. Earl handed me a bowl of stew, which I ate hungrily, though it tasted off, like the meat was a bit too gamey. As we talked, Earl mentioned his family lived nearby. "We're a close-knit bunch, been living here for generations." I nodded politely, trying to mask my unease. Something about the place felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Why don't you get some rest?" Earl suggested. "I'll take you to town in the morning." He led me to a small windowless room with a cot and a thin blanket. As I lay down, the exhaustion of the day's events began to weigh on me. My eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted off to sleep, despite my discomfort. I awoke to the sound of low voices and the unmistakable creak of floorboards. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. The voices were muffled but grew clearer as they approached my room. Instinctively, I reached for the flashlight, gripping it tightly as a makeshift weapon. The door swung open, and in the dim light, I saw Earl standing there with two others. One was a large, hulking man with a thick neck and a permanent scowl. The other was a woman with matted hair and a sinister grin. "Time to move," Earl said, his voice devoid of the previous friendliness. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Just a little family tradition," the woman replied with a twisted smile. "You're the guest of honor." Before I could react, the large man lunged at me, grabbing my arms with a vice-like grip. I struggled and fought, but he was too strong. They dragged me out of the room and down a narrow hallway, my flashlight clattering to the floor. I was brought into a large, dimly lit room that reeked of decay. The walls were lined with crude wooden cages, some of which contained skeletal remains. A makeshift altar stood in the center, stained with dried blood. My stomach churned with fear and revulsion. Earl and the woman began chanting in a low, guttural language as the large man tied me to the altar. I thrashed against the ropes, but they held fast. Panic surged through me as I realized their intentions. They were going to kill me. In a desperate bid for survival, I recalled the small pocket knife I always carried. With trembling fingers, I managed to reach into my jacket and flick open the blade. As Earl raised a rusty knife above me, I slashed at the ropes binding my wrists. The rope gave way and I rolled off the altar just as Earl brought the knife down, the blade sinking into the wooden surface with a dull thud. I scrambled to my feet, brandishing the pocket knife. The large man lunged at me again, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped his charge and drove the knife into his side. He roared in pain and staggered back, clutching the wound. The woman screamed and lunged at me with wild fury. I dodged her attack, kicking her legs out from under her. She fell to the ground with a grunt. Earl came at me next, the rusty knife slashing through the air. I parried with my pocket knife, the blades clashing in a spark of metal. Summoning every ounce of strength and resolve, I fought them off, landing blows and dodging their attacks. Bloody and battered, I managed to break free and sprint for the door. I burst out of the cabin and into the night, the cold air stinging my lungs. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping against my face, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of pursuit faded behind me, but I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of dawn on the horizon. Exhausted and disoriented, I finally stumbled upon a rural road. A passing truck slowed down as I waved frantically. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, pulled over and helped me into the cab. I explained what had happened, my voice trembling with the weight of the ordeal. The man nodded grimly and drove me to the nearest police station. The authorities took my statement and organized a search party to investigate the cabin. It didn't take long for them to find the gruesome evidence of Earl's family tradition. The police arrested Earl and his accomplices. The investigation revealed they were part of an inbred, cannibalistic clan that had been preying on lost travelers for decades. The skeletal remains found in the cages were identified as missing persons from as far back as the 1980s. The horror of that night will stay with me forever, but I refuse to let it define me. The authorities ensured that Earl and his family would never harm anyone again. After giving my final statement to the police, I thanked the officer and walked out into the daylight. The fresh air filled my lungs, and I knew I had survived something unimaginable. As I left the station, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that it was finally over. My name is Keon Norris. I was 42 years old when this happened, and I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, if I weren't the one telling this story, I wouldn't believe me either. I had spent my entire career as a marine biologist specializing in Florida's underground rivers and swamp ecosystems. I knew the science of these waters. The tides, the wildlife, the way nature worked in perfect, predictable patterns. But what I saw in Tate's Hell wasn't science. It wasn't natural. I took this trip to be alone. My divorce had been messy, my reputation in the academic world was in tatters, and I had nothing left but my camera and my RV. I told myself this would be an escape, a week-long trip through the swamps of Tate's Hell State Forest, documenting Florida's lesser-known river species. I parked my RV deep in the forest near an old dirt road that led to the Ocklawaha River. No cell service, no tourists, no noise, just me, the trees, and the black water stretching into the fog. The first 2 days were peaceful. I kayaked through the river, took photos of egrets, turtles, gators. The stillness of the place had a weight to it, like a place the world had forgotten. But by the third night, the stillness turned into something else. The first thing I noticed was the smell, rotting fish algae, something decaying, thick enough to make me gag. But the river was clear, the banks undisturbed. I checked my kayak, my supplies. Nothing. That night, I woke up soaked in swamp water. I jolted upright in my RV bed, my shirt clinging to my chest, my hair dripping. I knew I had locked the door, but when I checked, it was wide open. Muddy footprints led from the river to my bed, not mine. I told myself I must have sleepwalked. It had happened before. Stress, exhaustion, logical explanations. But then I found the footprints leading back outside. The next morning, I went out to the river with my camera, determined to catch whatever was messing with me. The water was still, untouched. But as I raised my camera, I noticed something strange in my reflection. I was standing still, but my reflection wasn't. It shifted, lagging behind me like an old video buffering. My breath hitched. I waved my hand. The reflection followed, but slower. I stepped back, shaking. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was a log floating just beneath the surface. But then long strands of red hair rose up through the water, tangled and drifting. I squinted, my heart thudding. The shape beneath the hair shifted, a pale face rising from the depths. A woman. Her eyes were dark, empty pits, and her mouth, it was stretching, wider and wider, rows of jagged teeth spiraling into the void. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a tree root, and I hit the ground hard. When I looked up, she was gone. The water was still. The air was dead silent. I grabbed my camera, hands shaking, and checked the photos. Nothing. The water was empty. But I knew what I saw. That night, the whispers started. I was in my RV, writing notes when my radio crackled to life. Static. Then a faint, wet voice. "Come in the water." I froze. My radio was turned off. The voice whispered again, closer this time. "Keon." My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my knife and stepped outside, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. And then I heard it, sloshing footsteps, dragging through the water. I swung my light toward the river. She was standing in it, waist deep, staring at me. Her skin was gray, slick with algae. Her red hair floated unnaturally around her face, but her mouth, her mouth was stretching open, her jaw unhinging like a snake's, black void inside, like she was about to swallow the night whole. I bolted inside, locked the RV, and forced myself to breathe. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination, a trick of the swamp gas. But when I woke up the next morning, my tires were slashed, my boat was half sunk in the river, and outside my door, the muddy footprints were back. I had to get out. I threw my things into my bag, my hands shaking. I could hike to the main road, find help, call a tow truck. But as I stepped outside, I saw something half buried in the mud beneath my RV. I swallowed, digging with my hands, pulling until my fingers found something solid. A skull, but not just any skull. It had a crack along the temple, a missing molar. I knew that skull. It was mine. I dropped it, scrambling back, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I heard her voice. "You've been here before," I spoke. And there she was, standing at the edge of the trees, grinning. Memories slammed into me, flashes of something I couldn't explain. I saw myself arriving in the RV, setting up camp. I saw her dragging me into the water, her nails slicing into my arms. I saw myself screaming, drowning, sinking into the red-stained depths, and then nothing. And then waking up in my RV on the first day of the trip, over and over and over. I wasn't on my first trip. I had been here before, and I had died here before. I staggered backward. No, this isn't real. She laughed, her voice like breaking glass. "It will be again." The world blurred. The trees spun. The last thing I saw was her hand reaching for me. Then, blackness. I woke up in my RV. The morning sun was rising. My boat was fine. My tires were untouched. My camera was in its case. The memory card empty. It was the first day of my trip. But when I looked in the mirror, my reflection lagged, and outside in the river, the red woman waited. I had been staring at the sinkhole for hours. The edges of the earth had crumbled away into a perfect jagged circle, leaving nothing but a gaping void beneath me. It was unnervingly symmetrical, as though the ground hadn't collapsed on its own but had been carved out by something or someone. I crouched at the edge, carefully adjusting my geological scanner, but the equipment was giving me nothing but static. The readings were all over the place. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, tapping the scanner in frustration. I hadn't come all the way to Hollow Creek for faulty data. I took a deep breath and scanned the horizon. The thick pines loomed like sentinels around the campground, their pale light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the landscape. My RV sat parked a short distance away, looking small and vulnerable against the vast wilderness of Chugach National Forest. It was a beautiful place, no doubt. Quiet, remote, exactly what I needed to clear my head. But the silence had a weight to it, an unnatural stillness that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was here on a solo trip, tasked with investigating the sudden appearance of several sinkholes that had been forming in the area. Geological instability was the theory, but something about the way these holes formed had raised red flags from the moment I arrived. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ethan, the local park ranger, and the closest thing to human contact I'd had in days. His voice crackled through the static as I picked up. "Hey Megan, how's it going out there?" "Not great," I admitted. "The equipment's glitching again, and these sinkholes, I don't know. They feel weird, not like anything I've seen before." Ethan chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Hollow Creek's always been strange. You wouldn't be the first to think something's off here." "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and dusting off my jeans. "You ever hear the stories about this place? Locals believe the sinkholes are more than just geological shifts. They think there's something ancient beneath the earth. The indigenous people used to call it the land that breathes. They thought the earth here was alive, that it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful." I rolled my eyes, though the words stirred an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. Sounds like folklore to me. "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone serious now. "But I'd be careful if I were you. These woods have a way of playing tricks on you. And the sinkholes, well, they've taken people before. People who didn't listen to the warnings." I didn't respond right away, staring down into the abyss of the sinkhole in front of me. I'd studied rocks and underground formations for most of my career, but nothing had prepared me for the unnerving stillness of this place. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But I'm here to study geology, not ghosts," Ethan sighed. "Just don't go too deep, okay? Call if you need anything." I hung up and pocketed the phone, but the conversation lingered in my mind. The land that breathes. Superstition, I told myself. Just old stories. I turned back to the sinkhole. Something inside me itched to see what was beneath the surface, to understand what was causing the ground to shift in such a strange, unnatural way. The patterns in the rocks I had been studying weren't like any natural formation I'd seen before. There were spirals, perfectly etched into the stone, as though by design, not by nature. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't meant to find. That night, the first signs of trouble came in the form of noise, a low, deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground like the hum of a giant, unseen machine. It started just as I was finishing dinner, sitting by the campfire. The sounds blended it into the whispering wind at first, but then it grew louder, more distinct, like a deep pulse coming from below. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The stars were barely visible, shrouded in the thick clouds that seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps, something moving in the dark. "Ethan?" I called, my voice small against the vast silence. Nothing. I walked toward the sinkhole, my stomach knotting with every step. The rumbling grew louder, and as I reached the edge, I felt it. Vibrations under my feet. The ground beneath me was shifting, alive. I shone my flashlight down into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed by the depths. I knelt, running my hand along the edge. The earth was soft, loose, as though it had only recently begun to settle after something had disturbed it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I scrambled backward, heart racing, just as a section of the earth collapsed, sending a cascade of dirt and rocks into the sinkhole. I fell onto my back, gasping for air, watching as the hole grew wider, deeper, like a hungry mouth devouring the ground. Adrenaline pumped through me as I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a geological phenomenon. Something was moving beneath the surface, something massive. I rushed back to the RV, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I fumbled for the key. But as I reached the door, the ground shook again, harder this time. The sinkhole was growing fast. I had to leave now. But then a thought struck me. What if I was right? What if this was something no one had ever discovered before? If I could just capture proof? If I could document what was really happening here, my work would be revolutionary. I would be vindicated. My mind flashed back to the spirals in the rock, the patterns that had seemed too deliberate to be natural. There was something ancient beneath the earth, and I was so close. I grabbed my gear and rushed back to the edge of the sinkhole. My heart pounded in my chest as I descended carefully into the darkness, lowering myself into the opening. The air grew colder as I went deeper. The walls of the hole were damp and slick beneath my hands. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The cavern was vast, much larger than I had anticipated. My flashlight illuminated jagged rock formations, but it was the carvings on the walls that caught my breath. Symbols, spirals etched deep into the stone. They were everywhere, ancient and deliberate. This wasn't just a natural formation. This was a structure, a temple of some kind, buried deep beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. I pulled out my camera, hands trembling, and began to record. But as I did, a low, resonating sound filled the cavern, a rhythmic pulse like the beating of a massive heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then, from the shadows, I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the deeper recesses of the cavern. Something was moving toward me. Something massive. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the stone walls. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a primal force that made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped, and then a deep, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. I ran. I didn't look back. The ground trembled beneath me as I scrambled up the wall of the sinkhole, my hands slipping on the loose earth. The growling grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the sinkhole, gasping for air, and ran toward the RV. The ground shook violently, and as I reached the door, I glanced back. The sinkhole was collapsing in on itself, the earth swallowing it whole. But for a split second, I saw something. Something massive, serpentine, rising from the depths before it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Hollow Creek behind me. By the time I reached the main road, my heart had finally begun to slow. I was alive. I had made it. But the images of that cavern, those symbols, haunted my mind. I had uncovered something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have stayed buried, something that was still there waiting beneath the earth. And I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be going back. My name is Levi Powell. I'm 38, and last fall I found myself stranded in the heart of Canaan Mountain backcountry, West Virginia, battling something I still can't fully explain. I'm a mechanic by trade, a pragmatist by nature, and I've always believed there's a rational explanation for everything. That belief was shattered on the coldest night of my life. This trip was supposed to be my victory lap. I'd spent over a year restoring a beat-up 1978 Winnebago RV, and when I turned the key and heard the engine roar to life for the first time, it felt like conquering a mountain. The Canaan Mountain wilderness seemed like the perfect place to test it. Isolated, rugged, and breathtaking, the backcountry offered me a chance to be alone with my thoughts and prove the RV could handle the toughest terrain. The first 2 hours of the drive were smooth. The roads narrowed as I climbed higher, with a dense forest pressing in from both sides. The GPS lost its signal halfway up, but I had my trusty map and compass. I wasn't worried. By late afternoon, I'd found a clearing off a dirt road where I could park the RV and set up camp. The air was crisp, the light golden as it filtered through the trees. It felt perfect. I spent the evening cooking dinner over a campfire, enjoying the solitude. The world felt far away, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. By the time I climbed into the RV to sleep, the fire had burned down to embers and the forest was silent. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, a stillness so complete it feels unnatural. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't the wind nor the creak of the RV settling. It was softer, whispers low and indistinct, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. My first thought was animals, maybe raccoons or coyotes. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the trees. Nothing. The forest was still. Too still. No insects, no rustling leaves, just the faintest echo of the whispers slipping through the air like smoke. I shook my head, muttered something about overactive imaginations, and went back inside, but I couldn't sleep. Morning broke cold and gray with a thick mist curling through the trees. I shrugged off the night's unease and decided to explore. I laced up my boots, grabbed my compass, and headed into the forest, following a faint trail that wound deeper into the wilderness. About an hour in, I stumbled across something strange, an old, crumbling stone cabin hidden beneath a canopy of gnarled trees. The roof had long since collapsed, and moss clung to the walls. Inside, I found a rusted metal kettle, shattered glass bottles, and a small leather journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but I could still make out fragments of the writing. It belonged to a man named Amos in the 1800s, and the entries detailed his encounters with what he called the Witch of Canaan Mountain. Amos claimed the witch was a reclusive woman accused of witchcraft by settlers who later killed her. Before her death, she cursed the mountain, vowing that anyone who disrespected it would suffer her wrath. I laughed to myself. Classic Appalachian folklore. People loved their ghost stories. But I couldn't shake a lingering unease as I left the cabin and made my way back to the RV. By the time I returned, the mist had thickened and the RV looked eerie in the fading light. I climbed inside, feeling a strange chill that wasn't just from the weather. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. My compass was spinning wildly, the needle refusing to settle. I sat at the table, trying to calm my nerves when I heard it again, the whispers. This time they were louder, more distinct. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding the RV. My flashlight flickered as I stepped outside. I scanned the clearing, my breath fogging in the cold air, but there was no one there. Then I saw it. A pile of stones neatly stacked in a triangle, sitting a few feet from the RV. I hadn't put it there, and I was certain it wasn't there before. My stomach tightened, but I told myself someone was probably messing with me. A prank or some local superstition. I kicked the pile over and went back inside, locking the door behind me. That was a mistake. That night, everything went wrong. It started with the RV. The heater cut out first, then the lights flickered and died. When I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't even turn over. I checked the battery, the fuel line, everything I could think of, but there was no logical explanation. It was as if the RV itself had been drained of life. As I worked, the whispers grew louder, closer. They weren't just outside anymore, they were inside, echoing in the walls, the floor, the cabinets. My tools began to move. I'd set a wrench down, only to find it on the other side of the RV seconds later. My flashlight flickered again, and for a brief moment I saw a shadow move across the window. I froze. It wasn't human. I couldn't stay inside. The RV felt suffocating, alive with unseen malice. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the night, determined to find the source of the whispers. The forest was alive with movement, shadows flitting between the trees just beyond the edge of the light. I found myself drawn back to the stone cabin, as if some unseen force was guiding me. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of overlapping voices. When I reached the clearing, the hunched figure of a woman stood in the doorway of the cabin. She wasn't human. Her skin was pale and stretched taut, her eyes hollow voids that seemed to pull the light from the air. Her voice, if it could even be called that, was a low, rasping hiss. "You have trespassed," she said, though her mouth didn't move. The words echoed in my mind. "You have disrespected this place." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground. She raised a skeletal hand, and the whispers surged, each voice filled with anger and pain. I saw flashes, images of settlers, the burning cabin, the witch's death. I felt her rage, her sorrow, her unrelenting need for vengeance. She offered me a choice: leave behind something of great value to appease her, or be trapped on the mountain forever. My heart pounded as I realized what she meant. My RV, my pride and joy, the project I'd poured everything into for over a year. She wanted me to destroy it. I tried to reason with her, to beg, but her form began to dissolve, the shadows closing in. I ran back to the RV, the whispers and shadows following me. I grabbed a can of fuel and a lighter, tears streaming down my face as I doused the RV in gasoline. When I struck the match, it felt like I was burning a part of myself. The fire roared, lighting up the clearing. The whispers faded, the shadows retreating as the flames consumed the RV. For the first time in hours, the forest was silent. By morning, the fire had burned itself out, leaving only the charred remains of my RV. The air felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone. I gathered what little I could carry and followed the trail back to civilization. This time, the path was clear. I've told this story to a few people since then, but no one believes me. They chalk it up to isolation, exhaustion, or my own imagination. But I know what I saw, what I heard. I left a part of myself on Canaan Mountain that night, and I'm not sure I'll ever get it back. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear the whispers. I used to think there wasn't much in the world that could shake me. After all, my life had been a string of adrenaline-fueled missions, each more dangerous than the last. My name is Roland Vanbrook, and I've spent the last 16 years working for a shadowy unit buried deep within the US government, tasked with hunting the things that aren't supposed to exist. Cryptids, monsters, creatures that lurk in the forgotten corners of the world. You name it, I've probably seen it or something like it, but there's something about the ocean, the way it stretches out into infinity, swallowing light and hope alike, that's always put a knot in my stomach. So when the call came about a string of disappearances off the coast of Washington State, I was less than thrilled to be the one selected for the mission. The waters there, they say, are haunted by old spirits. Turns out, old spirits were the least of anyone's worries. Daft, the local authorities were baffled. 5 people had vanished without a trace in just under a month. All experienced divers, all pulled into the same stretch of water near a place the locals called Dead Man's Cove. No bodies were ever recovered. No distress calls made. They were just gone. My partner for this mission was a man named Cliff Delaney, a former Navy SEAL with nerves of steel and a sense of humor drier than the Mojave Desert. He'd been in the unit almost as long as I had, and we'd been through hell together more times than I could count. If there was one man I wanted by my side when things went south, it was Cliff. We arrived in the small coastal town of Port Lowe, where the locals eyed us warily. We weren't wearing our usual uniforms. Instead, we blended in, looking like just another pair of tourists. It wasn't hard. This place was practically a ghost town. The tourists had stopped coming when the first diver went missing, and the locals weren't too keen on venturing out into the water anymore. Dead Man's Cove was about a mile offshore, a stretch of rocky coastline that dipped sharply into the Pacific. We chartered a small boat and headed out. The sky was overcast, the water choppy. The air was thick with the smell of salt and something else, something foul, like the stench of rotting fish left out in the sun too long. Ever get the feeling you're being watched? Cliff asked, breaking the silence. All the time, I replied, scanning the horizon. But this time, it's worse. We reached the cove and anchored the boat. The water below was a deep, dark blue, almost black, as if it was hiding something far worse than the usual predators of the sea. We suited up in our diving gear, checking our equipment one last time. Neither of us spoke as we slipped into the water, descending into the depths. The world around us turned into a cold, silent void. The light from the surface faded quickly, leaving us with only the beams of our flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. The deeper we went, the colder it became, and that foul smell grew stronger, clawing at the back of my throat. We hit the seabed at about 100 feet. The ground was littered with jagged rocks and thick strands of seaweed that swayed eerily in the current. We moved forward carefully, scanning our surroundings. Something was off. The usual signs of marine life were absent. No fish darting about, no crabs scuttling along the sand. It was as if the ocean had emptied itself, leaving only silence in its wake. Then we found the first piece of evidence, a mangled diving mask, half buried in the sand. It was cracked, the straps torn, as if by some tremendous force. Cliff picked it up, turning it over in his hands before looking at me with a grim expression. We were on the right track, but it wasn't exactly comforting. We pressed on, the tension between us palpable. The water around us felt thicker, more oppressive, like we were swimming through syrup. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a flicker of something huge moving just beyond the reach of our lights. Cliff saw it too, and we both stopped dead, hovering in the water. I swung my light in the direction of the movement, catching a brief glimpse of something massive and sinuous, its body undulating with an unnatural grace. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized just how wrong this thing was. It wasn't a fish or a shark or anything I'd ever seen in the ocean before. It was more like a giant eel, but far more twisted and grotesque. Its body was covered in dark, slimy scales, and its head was wrong, too large, too misshapen, like someone had tried to sculpt a creature out of nightmares and failed. I signaled to Cliff, and we began to retreat, moving slowly, trying not to attract its attention. But it was too late. The creature turned toward us, and I caught a glimpse of its mouth, rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth, more than any natural creature should possess, each one as long as my hand. Then it attacked. It moved with blinding speed, faster than anything that size had a right to. It struck Cliff first, wrapping its body around him, dragging him down into the sand with a force that sent a shockwave through the water. I tried to reach him, but the creature was too strong, too fast. In a matter of seconds, it had torn into him, and the water around us turned crimson with blood. Cliff's scream was muffled by the water, but it cut through me like a knife. I was paralyzed for a moment, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Then the creature's head snapped around, its empty, hollow gaze locking onto me. It released Cliff's body, which floated lifelessly to the seabed, and lunged at me, jaws wide open. Instinct kicked in, and I fired my spear gun. The spear struck the creature in the side, and it let out a horrifying, gurgling noise that sent chills down my spine. But it didn't slow down. I barely had time to get out of the way as it barreled past me, its body crashing into the rocks with a force that sent debris flying. I swam as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my heart racing. The surface felt impossibly far away, but I didn't dare look back. I could feel it behind me, closing in, its presence like a dark shadow over my soul. I made it to the boat, my hands shaking as I clawed my way on board. For a moment, everything was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then the boat lurched violently, nearly capsizing as the creature rammed it from below. Desperation clawed at my mind as I started the engine, pushing it to its limit. The boat shot forward, but the creature wasn't done with me. It chased us, slamming into the hull repeatedly, trying to knock me into the water. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the attack stopped. The creature must have given up, retreating back into the depths. I didn't stop, though. I kept the boat going until I reached the shore, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The local authorities found Cliff's body the next day, washed up on the shore. The wounds were unlike anything they'd ever seen. Deep lacerations, bones crushed as if by some immense pressure. They had no explanation, and I wasn't about to give them one. I left Port Lowe that evening, leaving the investigation to local authorities. The monster's corpse was found later, its massive body tangled in seaweed on a rocky outcrop near the shore. The thing was dead. And that was all that mattered. As I drove away from the town, the ocean stretched out beside me, endless and indifferent. I knew I would never return to that cursed place again. My mission was over, and so was the creature that had claimed my partner's life. I've always liked the quiet of the road, no one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit. The kind of tired that sneaks up on you where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry, with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff. No names or crude drawings. These were symbols. Spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go. But the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold. Too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone. Just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing and trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. Frank. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again, nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. "Come on," I muttered, trying to stay calm. "Don't do this to me now." I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach. They were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared, every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out of here, on foot, if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building, the carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. "Frank." I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there, no figures, no man in the coat. Just the voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Frank, you need to stay." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it, low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore, not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. Writing is supposed to be therapeutic, or so they all say. Pour your soul into your work, my therapist advised, as if putting my existential dread into words would magically fix my life. I believed her, at least for a while, but months had passed, and the words never came. So here I was, parked in the middle of nowhere in Tar Hollow State Forest, my RV nestled under a canopy of towering oaks. I'd heard about this place in passing, a quiet retreat for hikers and campers, but it was the stories about Devil's Bridge that intrigued me. Folklore, tragedy, and a cursed crossing. It had the makings of something special, maybe even the inspiration I needed to finish my novel. The bridge wasn't far from my campsite, about a 15-minute walk through a narrow trail. On my first evening, I made the trek, camera in hand, eager to find the supposed hotspot for ghost stories. The path twisted through the forest, late afternoon light filtering through the leaves. It felt serene at first, almost too quiet. Then I saw it. A crumbling stone bridge spanning a sluggish creek. The air around it felt heavier somehow, the silence deafening. As I approached, I noticed the water beneath the bridge reflected the trees above, but something was off. The reflection shimmered strangely, warping like heat waves on asphalt. I snapped a few pictures and recorded some video narrating for my own benefit. "This is the infamous Devil's Bridge," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the stillness. "Said to be cursed, haunted by a grieving woman who—" A splash cut me off. The water rippled, though nothing had fallen in. I peered closer, but the creek was as empty as it had been a moment ago. Just the wind, I told myself, though my pulse quickened. I was probably letting the stories get to me. Still, as I walked back to the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I woke to a sound. At first, I thought it was rain, but it wasn't coming from the roof. It was faint and rhythmic, dripping water. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. The noise seemed to come from outside, near the creek. Curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped into the cool night air. The forest was cloaked in darkness, the trees barely outlined against the faint glow of the crescent moon. The dripping sound was louder now, drawing me toward the bridge. When I arrived, I saw her. She stood in the middle of the bridge, her back to me. She was dressed in white, the fabric fluttering faintly even though there was no breeze. Her shoulders were hunched, her head bowed, and a soft sobbing reached my ears. I froze, every rational part of me screaming to turn back. But something about her, about the way she cried, pulled me forward. "Ma'am?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Are you okay?" Her sobbing stopped. She turned slowly, her movements fluid but unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Her face was pale, her eyes dark hollows that seemed to drink in the light. She opened her mouth, but the sound that came out wasn't a cry. It was a whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The reflection in the creek caught my eye. Her figure was there, but so was something else. A shadow loomed behind me in the water's surface, tall and formless, its shape flickering like smoke. I ran. The next morning, I drove into town, desperate for answers. At a small diner, I struck up a conversation with the locals, asking about the bridge. Most of them avoided eye contact, muttering about it being bad luck. But one man, a retired sheriff named Andrews, finally spoke up. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked, his tone grim. I nodded. "Who is she?" "Legend says she was a mother who lost her child in that creek. Drowned, they say. She followed not long after, but she's no grieving mother now." He leaned closer. "The stories say she made a deal with something dark. Now she's cursed to guard that bridge, trapping anyone who gets too close." I laughed nervously, though my gut told me he wasn't joking. "And the shadow I saw?" Andrews shook his head. "No one knows what that is. Some say it's the devil himself. Others think it's the souls she's taken. Best advice I can give you is to pack up and leave. That bridge doesn't let people go easily." I should have listened. Instead, I returned to the bridge that afternoon, unable to help myself. Something about it drew me in, as if it held the key to my creative block. Or maybe something deeper. Something darker. This time, I noticed symbols carved into the stones near the bridge. Intricate spirals and jagged lines seemed to pulse if I stared too long. The air grew colder, and the water's reflection twisted again, showing not just the trees, but faint images of faces. They flickered like static on an old TV, their mouths moving soundlessly. The shadow was there too, in the water. It moved unnaturally, stretching toward me. I backed away and nearly tripped over a small, overgrown path. It led deeper into the forest, the underbrush thick and uninviting. I don't know why I followed it, curiosity maybe, or the faint hope of finding answers. The path ended at a dilapidated shack, its roof sagging under the weight of moss and time. Inside, the air was stifling, heavy with the scent of damp earth. The walls were covered in writing, scratched into the wood in frantic, uneven lines. Words like cursed and marked jumped out at me, along with the name Watcher. On a small rotting table sat a mirror. I stepped closer, drawn to the glass, but when I looked into it, my reflection wasn't my own. My eyes glowed red and my face was twisted in agony. Behind me, the shadow loomed, closer than ever. I fled back to the RV, but the unease stayed with me. That night, the sobbing returned, louder this time, echoing through the trees. The woman appeared outside my window, her hollow eyes fixed on me. She mouthed the words, "Help me," but I knew better now. I stayed inside, gripping a knife I'd brought from the kitchen. The RV shook slightly, as if something was pushing against it, testing its strength. The mark on my arm burned. A symbol I hadn't noticed before, etched into my skin like the carvings on the bridge. By dawn, I knew I couldn't stay. I packed up and started the engine, but the RV wouldn't move. The wheels spun uselessly, as if the forest itself was holding me in place. Desperation clawed at me, and I found myself back at the bridge, drawn by some invisible force. The woman stood waiting, her form shifting like a mirage. "You have to help me," she said, her voice both pleading and commanding. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. She stepped closer, her face twisting into something monstrous. "Your soul," she whispered. The shadow surged from the creek, wrapping around me like smoke. My vision blurred, and for a moment I was underwater, the weight of the darkness pulling me down. Just when I thought I would drown, a new presence emerged. The Watcher. It stood between me and the woman, its form still shadowy but somehow less menacing. It raised a hand, and the woman shrieked, her figure dissolving into the air. The shadow around me loosened its grip, and I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. When I opened my eyes, the bridge was gone, collapsed into the creek as if it had never existed. I left Tar Hollow that day, abandoning my RV and most of my belongings. Even now, far from the forest, I feel the mark on my arm, a burning reminder of what I faced. The mirror in my hotel room reflects something different now. My eyes are darker and my face gaunt, and at night I still hear her voice. Help me. My name is Milo Gonzalez. I was 29 years old when this happened. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw. I had been living out of my RV for almost a year by then, drifting from place to place, trying to outrun my grief. My daughter Lacey had died in a car crash 18 months earlier. I was at home, drunk on the couch when it happened. I should have been there. I should have picked her up. But instead, I got a call from a state trooper at 3 a.m. Lucci State Forest was the last place she had wanted to go. She had been obsessed with ghost stories, always reading about haunted places and local legends. A few weeks before the accident, she told me about a witch that haunted the forest, some woman who lured people in and made them disappear. "You should take me sometime," she had said. But I never did. So I went alone. I found a secluded spot near an overgrown trail, parked the RV, and shut everything off. No radio, no news, just the forest and me. The stillness wrapped around me like a cocoon. For the first time in a long time, I almost felt at peace. Until the sun went down. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No crickets, no wind. The trees didn't sway even though I could feel the air moving. It was the kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes your ears ring. Then my radio crackled on. It was a police transmission. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the words, "This is dispatch, 911 caller reporting a vehicle collision on Highway 19. Possible fatality, over." My hands started shaking. That was Lacey's accident. That was her crash. Then another voice broke through the static, whispering, "You don't have to be alone." I turned the radio off. The static kept going. I stepped outside, the hair on my arms standing on end, my breath puffing in the cold air. There were footprints in the dirt, leading away from the RV. Barefoot, small. Like a child's, they led into the woods, and I swear to God I heard Lacey laugh. It was light, airy, her laugh. I hadn't heard it in over a year, but I knew it like I knew my own heartbeat. I should have run. I should have gotten in the RV and never looked back. But I didn't. I followed the footprints. They led me deep into the trees, down paths that hadn't been walked in decades. I stumbled over roots, my flashlight beam flickering as I moved forward. The laughter came again, closer now. Then I saw it. A house. It sat in the middle of a clearing, old and rotting, like something out of a nightmare. Spanish moss hung from the roof like curtains. The windows were broken, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something sour, something rotten. I stepped over broken floorboards, my breath shallow. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols I didn't understand, deep gouges in the wood like someone had scratched them in with their fingernails. Then I saw the mirror. It was covered in dust, leaning against the wall. My reflection was dim, barely visible. But as I wiped the glass clean, my breath stopped. Because I wasn't looking at myself. Lacey was staring back at me. She was wearing the same hoodie she had on the last time I saw her, her hair in a messy bun. Her eyes were wet, pleading. She opened her mouth, but it wasn't her voice that came out. Trade places. I stumbled back, knocking over an old chair. My reflection was normal again. Just me, wild-eyed and shaking. Then the laughter turned into screaming. Outside, the trees moved. Their branches twisted like arms, their trunks bending in ways that weren't natural. And through them, something stepped forward. A woman. She was tall and thin, her tangled black hair matted with moss. Her skin was pale, stretched too tight over her bones. Her eyes were black, bottomless pits, but I could feel them pulling at me. She smiled. "Come to me." My body wouldn't move. The air turned thick, pressing against my chest. I gasped, trying to force my legs to run, but they wouldn't. Then I heard Lacey again, crying this time. She was out there. I knew she wasn't really, but God, it sounded like her. "Dad?" I ran. I bolted through the trees, branches slashing my face, my breath ragged. I didn't look back. Even when I heard her following me, her steps soft, deliberate. I reached the RV and slammed the door, locking it. My heart pounded as I backed away, my eyes locked on the window. She was standing there, just outside, smiling. The RV shook. She was trying to get in. The windows rattled, the walls groaned. And then, silence. I sat there until the sun came up. I don't know how long. I don't remember sleeping. When morning came, she was gone. I started the engine and drove until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop until I was 50 miles away. A few nights later, I got a text, an unknown number. We never forget our own. I never wanted to take the job, not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened, saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route. Route 163 through the heart of Monument Valley and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first, static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago. No reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered, just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same. And it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty Hank, you gotta stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you gotta stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it!" I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time, I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. "How? How are you?" He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered. This can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running." I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped." The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. "I never blamed you, Rusty." His voice whispered softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. "But you got to forgive yourself." The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon, and then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady, as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running. Time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. My name is Phoenix Davis, and this happened to me on July 15th, 2010. I just picked up my new RV and was itching to take it out for a spin. I'd always been a bit of a loner, the kind of guy who enjoys his own company. So I decided to head out to the Oregon coast, somewhere remote and peaceful, away from the tourist traps. I parked the RV at a secluded spot in the Sauzian National Forest, just a short walk from the beach. The place was beautiful, with tall pines and the sound of waves crashing in the distance. I was planning to spend a few days there fishing, reading, and just unwinding. The first day was perfect. I set up a little campfire, grilled some fish I caught, and enjoyed a couple of beers as the sun went down. The forest got eerily quiet, but I didn't mind. It was just me, the stars, and the occasional hoot of an owl. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to explore the area. I hiked along the beach, finding little tide pools filled with crabs and starfish. I felt like I had the whole place to myself, which was exactly what I wanted. By the time I got back to the RV, it was late afternoon. I noticed something odd when I returned. There were footprints around my campsite. They weren't mine, and they definitely weren't from any animal I'd ever seen. They were large, too large to be human, and they had a strange claw-like shape. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was just some weird trick of the sand. That night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I'd hear a rustling in the trees, but whenever I turned my flashlight in that direction, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination, the forest playing tricks on me. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I locked up the RV, crawled into my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. I woke up a few hours later to a loud bang. It sounded like something had hit the side of the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and a baseball bat I kept for protection and stepped outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim light around the campsite. I shone the flashlight around, but I couldn't see anything unusual. Just as I was about to go back inside, I heard it again, a loud thud from behind the RV. My heart was pounding in my chest as I walked around to the back, bat in hand. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a large, dark figure standing there, just at the edge of the firelight. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the flashlight beam. It didn't move, just stood there staring at me. I was frozen, unable to move or speak. Then in a flash, it darted into the trees, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on where it had disappeared, and stumbled back into the RV. I locked the door and sat there, shaking until morning. When the sun came up, I decided I'd had enough of this place. I packed up my things as quickly as I could and started to drive back home. As I was leaving, I noticed more of those strange footprints around the RV, like whatever it was had been circling it all night. On the drive back, I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I didn't tell anyone about it, figuring they'd think I was crazy. But I knew what I'd seen. That thing was real, and it was out there. A couple of weeks later, I was back at home, trying to put the experience behind me. One evening, I was watching the local news when a story caught my attention. A group of campers had gone missing in the same area where I'd been. The news anchor mentioned that their campsite was found abandoned, with signs of a struggle and strange footprints in the sand. My heart sank. I knew then that whatever I'd seen wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was dangerous. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd had a narrow escape. A few days later, I got a call from my friend Dave. He was a park ranger in the Sauzian National Forest. I hadn't told him about my encounter, but he knew I'd been camping out there. He asked if I'd heard anything unusual while I was there. I hesitated, but decided to tell him everything. Dave listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're not the first one to see it, Phoenix. We've had reports of something like that for years, but we've never been able to find any solid evidence." He told me about the local legends, stories of a creature that the native tribes called Tanka. It was said to be a guardian of the forest, protecting it from intruders. Dave said that most of the reports were dismissed as folklore, but after what happened to the campers, he wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing, but another part of me couldn't let it go. I started reading up on local legends and cryptids, trying to find anything that matched what I'd seen. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Tishena was real. Months went by and life returned to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye or hear a rustling in the bushes when there shouldn't be. I kept my doors locked and a gun by my bedside, just in case. One night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. I grabbed the gun and crept downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The living room window was shattered and there was a large dark shape moving around outside. I aimed the gun and shouted, "Get out of here!" The figure stopped, stood, and turned to look at me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then it let out a low, rumbling growl and disappeared into the night. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of it. They found the footprints, though, those same claw-like prints I had seen at the campsite. I moved away from Oregon not long after that. I couldn't live with the constant fear of Tanka reminding me again. I settled in a small town in Colorado, far away from the coast and the forests. I never told anyone there about what happened, but I stayed vigilant, always keeping an eye out for anything unusual. Years passed, and the memories of that summer started to fade. But every now and then, I'd hear about campers going missing in the Sauzian National Forest, and I'd feel a chill run down my spine. I knew Tanka was still out there, watching and waiting. One evening, I got a call from Dave. He sounded shaken, more serious than I'd ever heard him. He told me that another group of campers had gone missing, and this time they'd found something. He wouldn't say what over the phone, but he asked if I could come back to Oregon. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed, and a few days later I was back in the Sauzian National Forest, standing by a familiar stretch of beach. Dave led me to the campsite where the campers had disappeared. The place was a mess, with torn tents and scattered belongings. But it was what he showed me next that made my blood run cold. There in the sand was a piece of wood with strange markings on it. Dave said it looked like some kind of totem, something the local tribes used in their rituals. He believed it was a warning, a sign to stay away. I didn't need any more convincing. I left Oregon that day and never looked back. I sold the RV and bought a small cabin in the mountains, far away from any forests or beaches. I still think about Tishena sometimes, wondering if it's still out there, watching and waiting for its next victim. I don't know what it is or where it came from, but I do know one thing. I'll never go camping again. The forest isn't as peaceful as it seems, and some things are better left undisturbed. My name's Reed Patel, and this happened to me in the National Forest in Oregon. I grew up in Portland and spent most weekends hiking the trails with my dad. After he passed away, I kept the tradition alive, even though the solitude wasn't quite the same. I wasn't the sentimental type, but being out there brought some quiet to my otherwise loud, chaotic life as an electrician. That particular weekend, I'd planned a 2-day solo trek, something to clear my head and test out some new gear. I wasn't an ultralight fanatic or anything, but I liked keeping things minimal, just me, the trail, and whatever nature threw at me. My route started at Timberline Lodge and cut through some backcountry trails that didn't see much traffic. It was early morning when I set out, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a map in the other. The first few hours were uneventful. The trails were damp from rain earlier in the week, and the scent of pine mixed with the occasional waft of mushrooms kept things pleasant. Around noon, I passed an older couple hiking with trekking poles. They waved but didn't stop to chat, which was fine by me. Solitude was the point. It was late afternoon when I noticed the first odd thing. I'd stopped at a clearing to refill my water from a nearby creek. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling, nothing. It wasn't unusual for animals to scatter when a human came stomping through, but this was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I joked to myself that maybe I'd finally reached that perfect peace people were always yapping about in self-help books. As I climbed higher into the denser part of the forest, the feeling lingered. Every so often, I'd hear a snapping twig or see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to squirrels or deer. That changed when I reached the ridge. There was a campsite up there, or at least what was left of one. A collapsed tent lay flattened against the dirt, its poles bent at odd angles. Gear was scattered around like someone had emptied a backpack in a panic. What caught my attention was the cooler, one of those sturdy, bear-resistant kinds. Its lid was wrenched open, and deep claw marks gouged the plastic. I didn't recognize the pattern. It didn't look like bear claws. Whatever did it had talons. I poked around cautiously. A jacket with a name tag, Franklin, hung on a low branch, ripped down the middle like someone had tried to peel it off. That's when I saw the blood. Not a lot, but enough to know something had gone wrong. My stomach tightened. I didn't consider myself squeamish, but the combination of the silence and the blood made the air feel heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I didn't linger. I wasn't about to play hero and investigate further, but I also didn't want to turn back the way I'd come. The campsite had a bad vibe, and if someone was injured, I wasn't eager to meet whatever or whoever had caused it. I decided to push forward toward a secondary trailhead about 5 miles out. It wasn't on my original route, but it would get me out of there quicker. The trail narrowed as I descended into a gully. Thick undergrowth swallowed most of the light, and the temperature seemed to drop. My boots squelched in the damp earth as I pushed past ferns that slapped against my legs. About halfway down, I caught a foul odor, like rotting meat mixed with damp fur. My first thought was a dead animal, maybe a cougar kill left to rot, but it was strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumbling noise that didn't sound natural. It wasn't a growl, but it wasn't mechanical either. It reverberated through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and I chose the third option: freeze. I crouched low, scanning the trees, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. I forced myself to move, creeping forward as quietly as possible. The trail curved ahead, and just as I rounded the bend, I saw it, or at least part of it. A massive, hulking shape loomed through the trees that I crouched over something on the ground. Its limbs were grotesquely long, the joints bending in ways that didn't make sense. It had patches of wiry fur mottled with bare, pale skin. What struck me most was its posture, like a predator that had evolved to ambush. I stayed hidden behind a tree, trying not to breathe. Whatever it was feeding, its movements jerky and almost insect-like. The thing was tearing into something unrecognizable, but its talons slicing through flesh with surgical precision. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to retch. The smell was overwhelming. A sudden snap of a branch underfoot betrayed me. The creature's head shot up, swiveling unnaturally as it scanned for the source of the noise. I didn't get a clear view of its face, but I did see its teeth, rows of uneven, serrated spikes that looked like they belonged in a shark, not on land. I bolted. Stealth be damned. I sprinted down the trail, branches clawing at my face and arms. The sound of pursuit was immediate, heavy footfalls crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't dare look back. My pack jostled against my shoulders as I weaved through the narrow trail, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. The trail forked ahead, and I veered left without thinking. Bad move. The path led to a dead end, a sheer drop-off into a ravine. My options were limited: jump and risk breaking something, or turn and face the thing head-on. Neither seemed appealing. I scrambled up a boulder, hoping to gain some height and buy myself time. The creature burst through the trees moments later, its gangly frame silhouetted against the dim light. Up close, it was worse. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones, and its movements were unnervingly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. It paused, tilting its head as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I fumbled for the small knife in my pocket, knowing it was more symbolic than anything. The creature lunged forward, and I did the only thing I could. I threw my pack at it. The motion startled it, and it recoiled briefly, giving me enough time to leap down the side of the ravine. I tumbled hard, dirt and rocks tearing at my clothes as I slid to the bottom. My ankle twisted painfully, but I managed to scramble to my feet. The creature didn't follow immediately, but I could hear it pacing above, its claws scraping against the rocks as it searched for another way down. I limped through the ravine, following the trickle of water downstream. My only thought was to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The ravine eventually opened up into a clearing, and I spotted a ranger's cabin in the distance. Relief surged through me, though it was tempered by the realization that I wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. The cabin was locked, but I found an axe leaning against the woodpile. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crouched low, gripping the axe and scanning the tree line. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. When it came, it was sudden. The creature barreled into the clearing, that moving faster than seemed possible for its lanky frame. I swung the axe as it charged, catching it in the shoulder. The impact staggered it, but the thing didn't go down. It lashed out with its talons, grazing my arm and drawing blood. We circled each other, predator and prey, roles blurring. I swung again, aiming for its head this time. The blade connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a piercing screech. It collapsed, twitching violently before going still. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork. With my arm bleeding and my ankle screaming in pain, I limped back toward the trailhead, keeping an eye on the shadows. I flagged down the first car I saw, a bewildered couple who probably thought I'd lost my mind. Years later, I avoid Mount Hood. Not because I'm scared, but because I've learned to stick to places where nature follows the rules, or at least pretends to. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign. Old, weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I'd been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I'd picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there, framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Yeah," I replied, lowering my camera. "It's peaceful." She smiled. "It always is here." "I'm Ellie, by the way." "Nick," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, like she'd been standing in the shade for too long. "You camping here too?" "For a little while," she said, her voice soft. "I come here every now and then. Can't stay away." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. The solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. "You here for the fishing?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. "No, just the lake, the quiet." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone. Just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. A soft, melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight. My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing, just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground. And that's when I saw her. A woman in white, standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. "Ellie?" I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure. But as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second, she'd been there, and the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I'd seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, as if she already knew. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "I saw something last night, a woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when you got close." Ellie finished, her voice calm, too calm. "The Lady of Stillwater." "The what?" I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. "She's been here for a long time, longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You're telling me she's a ghost?" Ellie shrugged. "Call it what you want, but she's real. And now that you've seen her, she won't let you go." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That's insane." "Is it?" Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. "You saw her. You know she's real." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. "She wants what she's always wanted, to take someone with her into the water." That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming, drifting through the night air, then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight. And there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please, come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. "I've waited so long." I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in. But my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now. "Before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable. And behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater. Her pale eyes following me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. My name is Ryder Warren, and this happened to me on October 22nd, 1999. I've always loved camping, grew up going out into the woods with my dad and brother. It's a tradition I've kept up, even though Dad's long gone and my brother has moved across the country. So when I bought this old RV, I was pretty excited to take it out for a spin. I'd planned a trip to a quiet spot in the Adara, a place I'd read about, but never visited. My buddy Nolan Hayes agreed to come along. Nolan and I had been friends since high school, so he was up for the adventure. We packed up the RV with everything we thought we'd need for a few days in the wilderness. Food, beer, fishing gear, and our sense of humor. We set out early in the morning, one of those clear days where the sky is blue and the air is crisp enough to feel like a promise of good times. The drive was uneventful. We joked about our wives getting a break from us and the silly things we used to do back in school. We arrived in the late afternoon. The place was perfect, quiet, a bit off the beaten path, with a small lake nearby that Nolan swore was brimming with fish. We set up camp, got the fire going, and cooked some burgers. As the night rolled in, we sat by the fire drinking beer and reminiscing. It was peaceful, and the stars were out in full force. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. Nolan crashed on the RV's couch, and I took the bed in the back. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, feeling like I'd heard something, the kind of noise that snaps you out of sleep, but you're not sure if it was real or just part of a dream. I listened for a minute, didn't hear anything else, and figured it was just the wind or some animal. I went back to sleep. The next morning, we found the campsite in a bit of a mess. The cooler was overturned and some food was scattered around. "Damn raccoons," Nolan muttered, picking up the debris. We laughed it off, cleaned up, and decided to spend the day fishing. The lake was serene and we caught a few fish. Things felt normal again. By the time we got back to the RV, it was getting dark. We cooked up the fish and settled in for another night by the fire. Nolan started telling ghost stories, trying to spook me. I played along, even though either of us really didn't believe in that stuff. Later that night, I woke up again. This time, I knew I'd heard something, a low, shuffling noise outside the RV. I sat up, listening intently. There it was again, closer this time. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly moved to the front of the RV. Nolan was snoring softly on the couch. I peeked out the window but didn't see anything. I told myself it was probably just an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, Nolan looked at me and said, "You look like hell. Didn't sleep well?" "Yeah, I heard something last night. Probably just an animal, but it kept me up," I replied. We decided to do some hiking and explore the area a bit. It was a good distraction and the fresh air helped clear my head. By the time we got back, I was exhausted, but felt better. We made dinner, talked about our plans for the next day, and turned in early. I woke up to a loud thud against the RV. My heart was racing as I sat up, straining to hear. Nolan was already awake, looking around nervously. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah, I heard it," I said, grabbing the flashlight and my pocket knife. We both moved cautiously to the front of the RV. I opened the door slowly and shined the flashlight outside. The beam caught something moving just beyond the light's reach. It was big, bigger than any animal I had ever seen. "Stay inside," I whispered to Nolan, who nodded and stepped back. I stepped out of the RV, trying to get a better look. The air was cold and the night was deathly quiet. I shined the flashlight around, but whatever it was, it had moved out of sight. The next morning, we found large, deep footprints around the RV. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Almost human, but not quite. Nolan and I exchanged uneasy glances. "What the hell made those?" he asked. "I don't know, but I don't like it," I replied. "Maybe we should head back," Nolan agreed, and we started packing up. The unease was palpable as we worked. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. By the time we were ready to leave, the sun was starting to set. We decided to spend one more night, figuring we'd leave first thing in the morning. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Every noise set me on edge. Around midnight, I heard the shuffling again, closer than ever. This time it was accompanied by a low, guttural breathing. I nudged Nolan awake and pointed to the door. We both grabbed our flashlights and cautiously stepped outside. There, in the dim light, we saw it. A creature standing on two legs, partially hidden by the trees. It was tall, covered in matted fur, with eyes that glinted in the light. It looked almost human, but not quite. It stared at us for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the woods. Nolan and I stood there, frozen in shock. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "Yeah, I saw it," I replied, my voice trembling. "We need to get out of here now." We hurried back into the RV, locking the door behind us. Neither of us slept that night. We sat in silence, listening for any signs of the creature. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, we started the RV and drove away, not looking back. We reported what we saw to the park rangers, but they didn't take us seriously. They said it was probably a bear or some other animal, but Nolan and I knew better. We'd seen something that defied explanation. I haven't been camping since. Nolan and I don't talk about it much. When we do, it's in hushed tones, like we're afraid saying too much will make it come back. I sometimes wonder if anyone else has seen it, if it's still out there, lurking in the woods. Years later, I came across a book about local folklore. It mentions sightings of a creature called the Guam, said to haunt the woods and prey on those who venture too deep. The description matched what we saw. I don't know if I believe in folklore, but I know what I saw that night, and I know I'll never go back to those woods again. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana. Population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. My days are usually filled with mundane tasks, which suits me just fine. I didn't sign up to be some action hero, but that was before what happened in 2014. That night, everything changed. Chesterville sits on the edge of Lake Ver, a slow-moving body of water surrounded by cypress trees and swampland. People here fish, drink, and go about their lives. It was a pretty uneventful Thursday evening. I was sitting in the patrol car near the lake, enjoying the last of my coffee. That's when the call came through. Domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, near the edge of the bayou. Some old shack out there. Probably a drunk couple having a fight. I sighed, thinking about how cold my coffee was going to get by the time I got back. I could have ignored the call. In a town this small, people mostly resolve their issues on their own, but it's my job, and I'm not the kind of guy to leave a job half done. So I punched the gas and headed toward the edge of the swamp, the smell of rotting vegetation creeping into the car through the vents. The air always smells different out there, heavy, like something's growing in the darkness. The address was off the main road, way off. I had to take a gravel path that was barely wide enough for my cruiser, with branches scraping against the sides like they were trying to keep me from going any further. The place was almost hidden behind thick trees, vines practically choking the building itself. It was an old, decaying wooden structure, more of a cabin than a house. When I stepped out of the car, everything felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just on edge because it was so quiet, and in a town where quiet usually means safety, this felt different, like something was waiting. I knocked on the door, no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a scraping noise from inside, something heavy being dragged across the floor. I called out, "Chesterville PD, anyone home?" Still nothing. Now I've dealt with drunks, domestic fights, and all sorts of noise complaints, but the sound coming from inside wasn't something I'd heard before. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I tried the doorknob. Locked. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, when I noticed something strange. A set of footprints leading around the back, but not human ones. These prints were larger, clawed, like some kind of animal. But whatever made them was walking on two legs, and they were fresh. I was starting to think this wasn't just some domestic dispute. I followed the prints, feeling a chill in the pit of my stomach. As I reached the back of the cabin, I saw the door was ajar, hanging on its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. The cabin was small, just one room, with a dirty mattress on the floor and a table covered in old newspapers. But what caught my eye was the blood. It was smeared across the floor, thick and dark, leading to a corner where something was slumped. I shone the flashlight on it. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body had been torn apart, like he'd been mauled by something much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. His chest was ripped open, ribs exposed, and his face, well, there wasn't much left to recognize. I barely had time to process the scene when I heard that same dragging noise again, but closer this time. Coming from behind me, I turned, heart racing, and shone the light toward the sound. Something was moving in the shadows. Something big. At first, I thought it was a bear. But bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand on two legs. It stepped into the light, and I froze. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with matted fur and a face that looked almost human, but twisted, distorted, like something halfway between a person and a wolf. Its claws were long, too long for anything natural, and its mouth was smeared with blood, teeth glistening like knives. I didn't hesitate. I drew my gun and fired, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. But it barely flinched. The bullets hit, sure, but they didn't seem to do much more than piss it off. It let out this low sound, like it was irritated more than hurt, and took a step toward me. I backed up, reloading as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I've never been a great shot, but at this range, it didn't seem to matter. Nothing was going to stop this thing. It lunged. I dove out of the way, crashing into a shelf that sent bottles and cans scattering across the floor. My head was spinning, but I managed to scramble to my feet and run for the door. I don't know how, but I made it back to the car, slamming the door shut just as it slammed into the side of the cruiser, rocking it on its wheels. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I gunned it back down the gravel path. The thing didn't follow me. It just stood there, in the rearview mirror, watching. As I sped away, its shape slowly faded into the darkness of the swamp. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to call it in, but what the hell was I going to say? That some kind of monster tore a man apart and nearly killed me? I thought about it for a long moment, staring at the radio, before deciding to do something I never thought I'd do. I lied. When I called it in, I said I found the man already dead, looked like some kind of animal attack, maybe a bear, maybe a wild dog. Hell, maybe both. I didn't mention the thing I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one out there that night. I found out later that 2 fishermen had been on the lake, close enough to the cabin to hear the gunshots. They saw something too, something large moving through the trees. They didn't get a good look at it, but they said it wasn't a bear, wasn't anything they'd ever seen before, and they swore it walked on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back out there with the sheriff and a couple of deputies. We found the body, or what was left of it, but there was no sign of the creature, just those same strange tracks leading off into the swamp. The sheriff wrote it up as an animal attack, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something didn't add up. I've thought about that night a lot since then, about how close I came to ending up like that poor bastard in the cabin, and about what's still out there lurking in the swamp. Some nights, when it's real quiet, I wonder if it's still watching, but I've learned not to go looking for answers. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better to let the mysteries stay buried. I can't remember a time I didn't enjoy the quiet. It's one of the reasons I became a park ranger in the first place. My name is Elias Thorne. I've been working at Yellowstone National Park for about 10 years now. The job isn't glamorous, but it's the only place where I feel truly at home. I have a small cabin near the park center, surrounded by towering pines and an endless chorus of nature. The day started off as any other. I brewed a pot of coffee, watched the sun rise over the treetops, and checked in on the radio for the day's assignments. It was a peaceful morning until I got a call from dispatch. A couple of hikers, the Petersons, had gone missing. Last seen near Devil's Grotto, a remote part of the park notorious for its rough terrain and dense forest. Devil's Grotto wasn't on my list of favorite places. The ground there is unstable and it's easy to lose your bearings. Still, missing hikers were a priority. I grabbed my gear, made sure my radio was fully charged, and headed out. The hike to the grotto took a couple of hours. The path was overgrown, and in some places it was barely visible. I called out for the Petersons every so often, but the forest swallowed my voice. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in on me. As I reached the grotto, I found their campsite. It looked hastily abandoned. There was a fire pit, some scattered belongings, and a couple of backpacks. The tent was torn open, as if something had ripped through it with tremendous force. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I radioed in my location and the condition of the campsite. While I waited for a response, I began to look around for any clues. The ground was disturbed, but there were no clear tracks, just a lot of broken branches and trampled vegetation. Then I heard it, a low, almost imperceptible sound, like something scraping against bark. I turned slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight on my belt. The light cut through the shadows, revealing more tree trunks and underbrush. Nothing unusual, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I found a trail of blood leading away from the campsite. It was faint but unmistakable. I followed it cautiously, my senses on high alert. The trail led deeper into the forest to an area I was unfamiliar with. I called out again, hoping against hope that someone would respond. Instead, I was met with silence. The blood trail ended abruptly at the edge of a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old, dilapidated cabin I'd never seen before. It wasn't on any map of the park. The structure looked ancient, wood dark and rotting, the windows broken and gaping like empty eye sockets. I approached the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was ajar, and as I pushed it open, it creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the oppressive stillness. Inside the cabin was dark and smelled of decay. I swept the beam of my flashlight around the room, revealing a scene out of a nightmare. The walls were covered in strange, primitive drawings smeared in what looked like dried blood, symbols and images I couldn't make sense of. And there, in the center of the room, was one of the Petersons, Mrs. Peterson, or what was left of her. She was mutilated, her body arranged in a grotesque display. I gagged, the bile rising in my throat. I stumbled back out of the cabin, desperate to get away from the horror inside. My radio crackled to life, startling me. It was dispatch, asking for an update. I managed to choke out my location and the condition of Mrs. Peterson. They told me to stay put, that backup was on the way. But something in me knew that staying put was the worst thing I could do. I heard the scraping sound again, closer this time. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the trees. The light caught a glimpse of something moving, something large and quick. It darted out of sight before I could get a good look. I didn't wait for a second encounter. I started running, heading back toward the main trail. The forest seemed to come alive around me, branches clawing at my clothes, the roots trying to trip me up. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy and relentless, matching my own. I burst into the clearing where the Petersons' campsite was, gasping for breath. I grabbed the radio and shouted for immediate extraction, but all I got was static. Panic set in. I couldn't go back the way I came, and there was no time to wait for help. I needed to find a defensible position. There was an outcropping of rocks nearby, and I scrambled up, hoping the elevation would give me an advantage. I found a spot where I could see the entire clearing and tried to calm my breathing. The footsteps stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the forest. Minutes felt like hours. I scanned the tree line, my flashlight sweeping back and forth. Then I saw it, a figure, almost human but not quite, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was covered in matted fur, its limbs too long and its posture hunched. It watched me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The creature moved forward slowly, almost cautiously. I reached for my knife, the only weapon I had. The flashlight in one hand, the knife in the other, I prepared for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. The creature stopped just a few feet away from the base of the outcropping. It tilted its head, studying me. I could see its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Then, without warning, it lunged. I slashed out with the knife, feeling the blade connect with flesh. The creature roared in pain, staggering back. Seizing the moment, I jumped down and ran. I didn't look back. I knew that my survival depended on speed and not making any mistakes. The creature was still behind me, but the sound of its pursuit was less frantic now. Maybe it was wounded, maybe it was weary. I didn't care. I just kept running. I broke through the tree line and found myself on one of the main trails. Relief washed over me as I saw headlights in the distance. Backup had arrived. I waved frantically and the vehicle sped toward me. The park rangers jumped out, weapons ready. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words were jumbled and incoherent. They ushered me into the truck and we sped away. As we drove off, I glanced back. The creature was standing at the edge of the forest, watching us leave. Back at the ranger station, I gave my report. A search team was sent out to recover Mrs. Peterson's body and to find any trace of Mr. Peterson. I knew they wouldn't find the creature, not if it didn't want to be found. It was smart, too smart. As I sat there trying to process everything, one of the rangers came in with a grim look on his face. They'd found Mr. Peterson, or rather what was left of him. The creature had made sure there was no mistaking its work. I don't know what that thing was, and I don't think I ever will. It's out there in the woods, waiting. But I knew one thing for sure. I'd never look at the forest the same way again. The peace and tranquility I once cherished were now forever tainted by the memory of those dark, haunting eyes. My name is Silas Kenneth, and this happened to me on October 3rd, 1998. I was a mechanic from Little Rock, Arkansas, looking for a break from the grind. The plan was simple: load up the RV, head to Washington National Forest, and just unwind for a few days. I invited my buddy, Jeff Simmons, a high school friend I hadn't seen much since we started our separate careers. He was a teacher now, over in Hot Springs. The drive up was uneventful. We talked about old times, work, and life. Jeff cracked jokes about the rusty RV I borrowed from my uncle, though it was a rickety thing, it had a certain charm to it. We arrived at the campsite by late afternoon, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows through the trees. The place was practically deserted, which suited us just fine. We wanted peace and quiet. We set up camp quickly, and by nightfall, we had a fire going. We sat around drinking cheap beer and grilling hot dogs. The stars were out in full force, and the forest was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was perfect. The first night passed without incident. The next morning, we decided to explore the surrounding area. The forest was dense with towering pines and thick underbrush. We hiked for hours, finding a small, crystal-clear stream where we filled our water bottles and cooled off. By late afternoon, we made our way back to the RV. Jeff was in high spirits, laughing and recounting some old-school stories. As we neared the campsite, we noticed something odd. The door to the RV was ajar. Jeff gave me a puzzled look. "Did you leave it open?" he asked. "Nope. Must have been the wind or something," I replied, but a sense of unease crept over me. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. We shrugged it off and went about preparing dinner. That night, as we sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Jeff, always the more intuitive of us, picked up on my mood. "You okay, Silas?" he asked. "Yeah, just got a weird feeling, that's all," I muttered. He nodded, tossing another log on the fire. "Probably just the isolation getting to you. We're not used to this kind of quiet." We turned in early, exhausted from the day's hike. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It was a faint rustling, like something moving outside the RV. I held my breath, straining to listen. The noise stopped, and I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to Jeff. He shrugged it off, but I could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. We spent the day fishing at a nearby lake, bringing back a decent haul. That night, as we cooked our catch over the fire, the unease returned. Halfway through our meal, we heard it again, the rustling. This time, it was closer. Jeff stood up, peering into the darkness. "Probably just an animal," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We finished eating in silence, the tension between us palpable. We decided to take turns keeping watch just in case. Jeff took the first shift while I tried to sleep. My dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures and distant cries. Around 3 a.m., Jeff shook me awake. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "Jeffrey, there's something out there," he whispered. I grabbed the flashlight and my old hunting knife. We stepped outside. The night air was cool against my skin. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of sex and nocturnal creatures eerily absent. We moved slowly, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The rustling came again, followed by a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We froze, listening. The sound was coming from the other side of the RV. We crept around, staying low. The flashlight's beam caught something, a shadowy figure darting out of sight. Jeff swore under his breath. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Yeah, what the hell was it?" We didn't have an answer. We spent the rest of the night inside the RV, weapons at the ready. Sleep was out of the question. By dawn, we were both on edge. The previous night's encounter had rattled us. We debated packing up and leaving, but pride and curiosity got the better of us. We decided to stay one more night, hoping to get a better look at whatever was out there. We spent the day scouting the area, looking for tracks or any signs of the creature. We found nothing, but the feeling of being watched never left us. As the sun set, we fortified our camp as best we could, piling logs around the fire and securing the RV's door. Night fell, and with it, the oppressive silence. We sat by the fire, weapons close at hand. Hours passed with no sign of the creature. Just as we began to relax, the rustling returned, louder this time. Jeff and I exchanged a look, and I nodded. We were ready. The noise circled our camp, staying just out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest as we strained to see into the darkness. Suddenly, the creature charged out of the underbrush, a blur of fur and claws. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, a twisted, nightmarish blend of man and beast. Jeff screamed as the thing lunged at him. He swung his flashlight, but the creature was too fast. It knocked him to the ground, its claws raking across his chest. I yelled and ran at it, slashing with my knife. The blade connected, and the creature let out a chilling howl before retreating into the forest. I dropped to my knees beside Jeff. He was bleeding badly, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Hold on, Jeff. We're gonna get you out of here." I grabbed a towel from the RV and pressed it to his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. Desperation clawed at me. "Stay with me, man," I begged. Jeff's eyes met mine, and he managed a weak smile. "Jeffrey, get out of here. It's not safe," he whispered. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "Like hell, I'm leaving you." But deep down, I knew he was right. The creature was still out there, watching, waiting. I had to make a choice. I dragged Jeff into the RV, locking the door behind us. I kept pressure on his wounds, praying for a miracle. Hours passed, the silence broken only by Jeff's labored breathing and my whispered reassurances. As dawn approached, Jeff's breathing grew fainter. His grip on my hand loosened, and I knew he was slipping away. "Hang on, Jeff, just hang on," I whispered, though I knew it was useless. His eyes fluttered closed, and with a final shuddering breath, he was gone. I sat there, numb, as the first light of dawn filtered through the RV's windows. My best friend was dead, and the creature was still out there. I had to get help, but I couldn't leave Jeff's body behind. I wrapped him in a blanket, tears streaming down my face. I promised him I'd come back for him. I grabbed the keys and started the RV, my hands shaking as I drove away. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting the creature to follow. I reached the nearest ranger station hours later, stumbling inside, half crazed with grief and exhaustion. The rangers didn't believe me at first, but the blood on my clothes and the desperation in my voice convinced them to send a search party. They found Jeff's body and signs of a struggle, but no trace of the creature. They chalked it up to a bear attack, though I knew better. I never went back to Washington National Forest. Jeff's death haunted me, and the memory of that night lingered like a dark cloud over my life. Years later, I heard whispers of similar attacks in the area. The locals had a name for the creature, the Warden. They spoke of it in hushed tones, a legend passed down through generations. I didn't need to hear the stories to know the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. I still think about Jeff and that terrible night. The guilt and the questions never go away. What was the creature? Why did it attack? I'll never know. But one thing is certain. There are things in this world that defy explanation, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. They don't tell you much when you get selected for a government project like this. They like to keep things on a need-to-know basis. And as a geneticist with the Department of Defense, I learned to live with that. My name is Richard Lowe, and for the past year, I've been working on something called Project Harvest in a facility so secluded that even the local wildlife stayed away. The work was classified, of course, and our team was comprised of the best in the field. We were tasked with developing bioenhancements, pushing the boundaries of human potential. The aim was to create a new generation of soldiers, but there were whispers, rumors about the dark side of our experiments. The details of what we were doing sometimes felt too surreal to be real, but I pushed those thoughts aside, trusting in the science and the rigid protocols that kept everything in check. The facility itself was a concrete fortress, buried deep within a dense forest, surrounded by miles of electrified fencing and guarded by men who didn't ask questions. It was the kind of place where cell phones were confiscated at the gate, and the only communication with the outside world was through heavily monitored channels. We were working on something extraordinary, combining human DNA with that of various animals to enhance physical capabilities. We had code names for the different genetic strands: Viper for enhanced reflexes, Rhino for strength, and Panther for agility. The most promising and most dangerous strand was the one we codenamed Cerberus. Cerberus was an attempt to merge the regenerative properties of a salamander, the resilience of a wolverine, and the predatory instincts of a great white shark into a single human genome. The idea was to create a soldier who could not only heal from injuries quickly, but would also be nearly impossible to kill. However, there was something we didn't anticipate, something that the algorithms couldn't predict. The Cerberus strand did more than just enhance physical capabilities. It altered the subject's psyche in ways we couldn't understand. Subject 17 was the first to be injected with Cerberus. He was a Marine, a good man by all accounts, tough as nails, and always the first to volunteer for anything that could push the boundaries. The first few days after the procedure seemed promising. His reflexes were off the charts, his strength unmatched, and he had developed an uncanny sense of awareness, almost as if he could anticipate movements before they happened. But then things started to go wrong. It was subtle at first. Sleepless nights, irritability, a strange detachment from the rest of the team. He started avoiding the others, spending hours alone in the observation chamber, staring into the darkness like he was waiting for something. The biometric readings showed abnormal brain activity, but nothing that could be quantified as a direct threat. We monitored him closely, adjusting the dosages, running more tests. Then one night, he vanished. The facility went into lockdown. The security feeds showed nothing. One moment he was there, sitting in his room. The next, the camera flickered, and he was gone. I was in the lab with Dr. Harrington, another geneticist, when the alarm started blaring. The look on her face was enough to send a chill down my spine. We knew what we were dealing with. We had created something we couldn't control, something more than human. The search teams went out immediately, armed to the teeth, but it was clear from the start that they were no match for what they were hunting. The radio chatter was a mix of panic and confusion, shadows moving faster than they could react, something powerful enough to tear through reinforced steel doors like they were paper. By the time the first team's signal went dead, I knew we were in deep trouble. Harrington and I were ordered to the control room, the safest place in the facility, or so they told us. We watched the monitors in silence, the screens filled with static more often than not, as the creature, Subject 17 or what was left of him, moved through the facility like a ghost. The guards were picked off one by one, their screams cut short, with only fleeting glimpses of something that defied description caught on the cameras. It moved on all fours, its limbs elongated and twisted, covered in a thick, dark hide that shimmered like oil. Its teeth, once borrowed from the great white, were now visible in a permanent snarl, its jaws snapping with terrifying speed and precision. Harrington tried to make sense of it, muttering something about neuropathways and primal instincts, but it was clear. There was no logic left in this creation. Cerberus had taken over, and all that was left was a predator, a perfect killing machine. The last communication we received was from the head of security, his voice barely recognizable under the strain of terror. "It's hunting us," he said before the line went dead. We were down to just a handful of people when the decision was made to abandon the facility. They had protocols for situations like this, self-destruct sequences, emergency evacuation procedures, but the reality was far messier. The idea was to seal the creature inside and bring the whole place down on top of it. But as we made our way through the labyrinthine corridors, it became clear that Cerberus was always one step ahead. The power flickered out, plunging us into darkness. The emergency lights cast long, flickering shadows, and every sound was amplified tenfold. Harrington and I were separated from the others during the chaos, ending up in the lower levels where the labs were. We tried to make our way back to the surface, but it was too late. The exits were blocked, the corridors littered with the remains of what had once been our colleagues. We barricaded ourselves in one of the observation rooms, hoping to wait it out until the evacuation team could extract us. But we both knew it was a long shot. The creature was relentless, methodical, driven by a mind that we could no longer understand. It found us eventually. The door to the observation room buckled under its assault, and when it finally gave way, we came face to face with what we had created. Its eyes, once human, were filled with a cold, calculating intelligence, and I could see a flicker of recognition as it looked at us. Then it pounced. Harrington didn't stand a chance. It tore into her with such ferocity that she didn't even have time to scream. I ran, knowing full well that there was nowhere to go. I could hear it behind me, the sound of claws scraping against the metal floor, getting closer with every step. I made it to the control room, the reinforced door slamming shut behind me. The room was empty now. The monitors all showed static. I knew it was only a matter of time before it found a way in. And then, as if by some miracle, the power surged back on. The lights flickered to life and the screens cleared, showing the facility in its entirety. I saw it then, the creature standing outside the door, its head cocked to the side as if it were listening for something. I froze, my hand hovering over the controls for the self-destruct sequence. But then something unexpected happened. The creature turned away, moving slowly down the corridor. It didn't make sense. It had me trapped. There was no reason for it to leave, but it did, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me alone in the control room. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't wait to find out why. I activated the sequence, the alarms blaring as the countdown began. I made my way to the emergency exit, hoping against hope that I could outrun the explosion. The facility went up in flames behind me, the ground shaking as the underground levels were consumed by fire. I stumbled out into the cold night air, collapsing in the dirt as the blast wave rolled over me. I was the only one who made it out alive. The official reports were sanitized, of course. They called it a containment failure and hushed up the details. But I know what happened, what we created, and I know it's still out there somewhere, in those woods, waiting. But that's not my concern anymore. I did my job, followed the orders, and now I'm done with it. The past is buried beneath tons of concrete and steel, just like the facility. Whatever comes next, it's not my problem. My name is Zane Richards, and I'm 34 years old. This happened last fall during what was supposed to be a peaceful RV trip in Big Spring, Missouri. I went there to escape my life, to find some quiet, and maybe start writing the memoir I'd been putting off. What I found still haunts me to this day. I pulled into the campground just before dusk, the sun casting golden streaks across the towering oaks. My RV, a secondhand model that had seen better days, rumbled to a stop at the edge of the spring. The water was breathtaking, crystal clear and almost otherworldly in its vibrant blue-green hue. It looked like a portal to another world. I parked in a secluded area, close enough to the spring for a view, but far from other campers. I was used to being alone after leaving my career as a journalist. I'd spent the past year traveling from one quiet place to another, hoping to find some semblance of peace. Big Spring, with its remote beauty, seemed perfect. That first night, I sat by the campfire, jotting ideas into my notebook. The woods around me were silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, just as the stars began to appear, I heard it, a faint melody carried on the wind. It was soft at first, like a lullaby hummed by a distant voice. I paused, my pen hovering above the page. It wasn't unpleasant, but something about it made the hair on my arms stand on end. I brushed it off as my imagination and went to bed. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. While walking the trail to the spring, I bumped into Lucas Green, the park ranger. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a weathered face that spoke of decades spent in the outdoors. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Camping alone?" "Yeah," I replied, "just me and my RV." He frowned slightly. "Big Spring's beautiful, but it can get strange, so I stick to the main trails and don't wander too far after dark." I laughed nervously. "Strange?" He hesitated, then said, "You'll hear stories around here. Folks talk about a song. They say it's tempting. Just don't pay it any mind." His words lingered with me as I hiked back to my campsite. That evening, I met another camper, a young woman named Maggie. She was cheerful and carefree, the type of person who seemed at ease in any situation. We shared a campfire for a while, swapping stories. "Did you hear the song last night?" Maggie asked casually, poking at the fire with a stick. I froze. "You heard it too?" "Yeah, but it's probably just the wind," she said with a shrug. "Or maybe the ghost of the girl who drowned here. Local legend says she sings to people, trying to pull them into the spring." I laughed nervously, but I couldn't shake the unease that crept over me. That night, the melody returned. It was louder this time, clearer, a woman's voice, soft and mournful, drifted through the trees. "Zane?" I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering. It wasn't possible. No one knew I was here, and yet the voice was unmistakably calling my name. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was still, the forest eerily quiet. The song had stopped, but the unease lingered. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed something odd. Footprints in the damp earth leading from the direction of the spring to my RV. They were small, like a woman's, and they stopped abruptly at my door. The next day, I hiked to a nearby cabin I'd spotted on my map. It belonged to Old Man Clyde, a local hermit who lived on the outskirts of the park. Clyde was a wiry man with sharp, piercing eyes and a voice like gravel. When I mentioned the song, his expression darkened. "Shouldn't have come here," he said bluntly. "The song ain't natural. It's her. Clara. She drowned herself in the spring a long time ago. Heartbreak will do that to a person." "What does she want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She wants company," Clyde said. "And if she's calling your name, it means she's chosen you." That night, the song returned, louder and more insistent. The voice was beautiful, achingly sad, and it called my name over and over. "Zane, come to me." I tried to ignore it, but my body moved on its own, as if the voice had taken control. I stepped out of the RV barefoot, at the cold earth numbing my feet. The moonlight bathed the spring in an otherworldly glow, and at its edge I saw her, Clara. She was stunning and terrible all at once. Her long, dark hair flowed like ink, and her pale skin glowed faintly in the moonlight. Her eyes, hollow and black, fixed on me as she sang. "Join me," she whispered, her voice echoing like 1,000 whispers. "It's peaceful here. No pain, no guilt." I took a step closer, her words wrapping around my mind like a warm blanket. But then I saw my reflection in the spring. It wasn't me, it was a younger version of myself, haunted and broken. "Zane." The shout broke the spell. I turned to see Lucas running toward me, holding a bundle of sage and a small jar of salt. "Stay back," he yelled. Clara's face twisted into a mask of rage. The air around her grew colder, and the ground beneath us began to tremble. Lucas tossed the salt in a circle around me, salt then lit the sage, chanting words I didn't recognize. Clara screamed, a high-pitched wail that pierced the night. Her form flickered, then dissolved into mist. Lucas helped me back to my RV, both of us shaken, but alive. "She won't be gone for good," he said, "but you're safe for now." I left Big Spring the next morning, my heart heavy, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. Clara's song still lingers in my memory, a haunting reminder of how close I came to losing myself. Even now, I wonder if she's still there, waiting for another lost soul to answer her call.